Just moving into open session here, members. Into public session, so I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon's sitting of the Education Committee. Just the usual housekeeping issues first of all. Advise members that the meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online, and I would advise those in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. So in terms of apologies, I have just an apology for lateness from Peter, and no other apologies unless any other members are aware. No. And we have Cara joining us.
If I can just come in there.
Yes?
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a bit of a delay
my
with
internet,
your audio.
My internet connection's awful. Just to say, I'll be nipping out. I'll text the clerk.
Okay.
The clerk.
Yeah, apologies, Cara. The audio wasn't great there. I think we picked up that Cara may need to pop out for some of the meeting, but we'll just manage that as we go. But yeah, Cara is joining us online, so obviously if there are any issues with your connection or audio, just liaise with the clerk and her team. So that's apologies at this stage. Item 2 is chairperson's business. There's nothing for chairperson's business today. I think we had a long concurrent meeting today with the economy committee, so I think probably all members are probably eager just to get to the agenda, as we've already had a meeting this morning. Item 3 is declaration of interests. Can I just check if there are any items in the agenda where any members need to declare an interest today? No. If anything should arise, as usual, please just indicate. Item 4 is matters arising, and it's just really to refer members to correspondence or response that's come in from the Department of Education, which was in relation to funding, the capital funding for outdoor equipment as part of the curriculum-led capital programme, and that's at page 7 of your packs. So we discussed this last week at our budget briefing, and it was around concerns in terms of whether schools would be able to access that funding into the current financial year. Danny, I think it was yourself who'd raised that. The correspondence does clarify that the department is affording schools flexibility, that if they ordered the equipment in the previous financial year, the spend would be honoured in the next. So, I'm content to note that unless members want to add anything at this stage. No, that's grand. So item 5 then is draft minutes. So those are the minutes of the committee meeting of the 7th of May. That's at page 10 of your packs. I would just be seeking members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Is that agreed? Agreed. Just get okay. So that takes us on to the first evidence session for committee today, and that's item 6 on your agenda, and if we want to bring the witnesses through. So it's a briefing today from Corlia na Gaelscoileachta, and that is in relation to recommendations for Irish medium education. So I would refer members to a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 18, a briefing paper from Sina G at page 19, and then we have a report at page 30, which is a report into the provision for special educational needs and disabilities in the Irish medium sector, and that was from May 25, so very recent report there. So I'll just let witnesses get seated. Joining us today, we have Maria Thomason, the Chief Executive from Corlia, and also Orla Nagari, the Senior Education Officer with Corlia, so you're both very welcome here today. The purpose, I think, is there will be a focus on SEN in terms of the briefing today, but I imagine there will be a range of issues that members may want to pick up, and we obviously have the department in as our next briefing session, and they will be addressing issues relating to Irish medium. So again, it's a good opportunity for issues to be aired here that we may want to pick up with the department in the following session. So understand for in terms of an opening presentation, just members may want to be aware that we'll be using the translation service if members want to use their headphones, and just note you may need to just turn the volume up to get that coming through. And then we will move to question and answer after that session, and also if any members are wanting to make their contributions today in Irish, the translation service is available there for everybody. So at this stage, I'm going to hand over for opening presentation. You're very welcome here today. We would ask for that to be up to 10 minutes, and then into question and answer. So over to yourselves.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you. I'm Maria Thomason. I am the Chief Executive of Comhairle na Gael Scoileachta, and I'm joined today by Orla Nagari, Senior Education Officer with CNG. Thank you for inviting us to discuss Irish medium education and the work of CNG this afternoon. I would also like to thank the Assembly Translation team for providing us the opportunity to make this presentation in Irish today. I understand that we are here today to discuss IME and special support, and Orla will be talking about that a little bit later. But first, I thought the new members of the committee will be interested in some general information about the sector and our organisation. Irish medium education has been a growing sector for 50 years. Today, there are over 7,500 pupils attending 46 nursery schools, 35 primary schools, 5 post-primary schools located throughout the north. It is a source of pride that Irish medium education provision is available in every sector. This is to say that there are independent Irish medium schools as well as controlled IM schools, IME streams and units in Catholic maintained schools and in one grammar school. We also have one integrated nursery school, Ní Scoil na Seolta, which has been in operation in East Belfast for a number of years, with the first cohort of primary school age children due to start P1 at Scoil na Seolta in September 2025. Immersion education is a form of bilingual education. Immersion education can be found worldwide, for example, in Canada, in New Zealand, Belgium, Scotland and Wales. The pedagogy of immersion education is used in Gael Scoileanna, where all subjects are taught through the medium of Irish. Irish is therefore the medium used in Gael Scoileanna to teach and deliver the Northern Ireland curriculum to IME pupils. According to international research, there are many benefits associated with immersion education, such as social, cognitive, communication benefits. In the year 2000, DE established CNG to support them in implementing their statutory duty to encourage and facilitate the development of the Irish medium education. The vision of CNG is to have a network of vibrant, viable Irish medium schools from preschool to post-primary available to all who wish to avail of it, IM schools which deliver high quality education. We have a broad role to play as an organisation in achieving that vision. We are advocates, we provide advice and guidance to the public, DE and other educational groups, and we take every opportunity to put Irish medium education at the heart of every conversation. With continued growth, however, come challenges. The sector operates in a monolingual system that does not understand immersion education and does not usually take the specific needs of the sector into account. 60% of Irish medium schools are located in buildings that are temporary or not suitable for education purposes. While the department has done a great deal of work over the years on accommodation and infrastructure within the IME school estate, there is still much to be done to achieve equity with English medium schools. Teacher supply is the biggest obstacle to the development of the sector today. There is now a crisis, and DE urgently needs to put solutions in place to ensure that there are enough teachers to develop and deliver the entire curriculum in every Irish medium school. Unfortunately, DE has always lacked vision, strategy and understanding of IME, and as such we face the same challenges today as we were identified in the review of Irish medium education published by DE in 2008. It is clear that DE urgently needs an Irish medium education policy to provide strategic guidance and ring-fenced funding to the sector. Fortunately, work is now underway in DE to write a strategy for Irish medium education. We hope this strategy will encourage accountability within DE, the EA, etc., and that it will achieve equity for students of the sector. We look forward to seeing a clear action plan as a result of this work that will address the challenges, and it is imperative that this work be done at pace. That said, however, it is vital that Comhairle na Gael Scoileachta and the sector itself play a central role in writing this strategy. Our role in CNG is not only to highlight the challenges, but to find and present solutions. We have the solutions. All we need now is the structure and political will and to implement them.
Rachel.
According to the year's figures for the department, that 23.3% of pupils in IM schools are on the SEN register across stages 1 to 3. This compares to 19.8% in the EM sector. It's incredibly important to contextualise these figures and the higher instance of SEN amongst IM pupils, as IM schools still have to contend with the false narrative that attending an immersion setting may be the reason pupils have a special educational need, or may exacerbate an existing need, and that is certainly not the case. The majority of IM schools are located in areas of socio-economic disadvantage, with 1/3 located in the top 100 super output areas, and these areas have a far greater instance of SEL in general, hence the higher percentage. Despite the misinformation around immersion education and SEN, pupils with additional needs can thrive in IM schools. Emanating research highlights many benefits, including cognitive, social and cultural advantages, along with increased employability for pupils. Immersion pedagogy has been hailed as being a very positive approach to teaching and learning for pupils with social and communication difficulties due to the communicative approach employed in immersion classrooms. Whilst not renowned as being an easy language, the more shallow orthography of the Irish language has been proven to be an easier language for pupils with literacy challenges to build an initial foundation in language development, which can in turn be utilised to build competence in more difficult language such as English. It is an ongoing frustration, therefore, that the benefits of an immersion education for pupils with SEN are not being taken advantage of in our system. Instead, the current monolingual approach is doing pupils a massive disservice in the lack of appropriate support and intervention available to them, and in many instances, families are actually having to leave IM schools as the provision simply does not exist. A copy of our recent SEN paper has been shared to provide a comprehensive insight into the challenges facing IM schools and pupils. I will focus on 3 of those areas. Despite nearly 8,000 IM pupils within our education system, currently within EEA Pupil Support Services there are no dedicated IM staff. All support and intervention is delivered through the medium of English. If you are a Primary 2 pupil, for example, who is presenting with literacy difficulties, the only peripatetic support available to you is in English. But if you're a Primary 2 pupil attending an IM school, all of your formal learning to date has taken place through the medium of Irish. You've begun to learn phonics and develop reading ability in Irish only. So what happens then, more often than not, is that peripatetic support is not introduced until the formal learning of English begins at the end of Key Stage 1, with such emphasis on early intervention that is lost to IM pupils. There is an urgent need, therefore, to recruit dedicated IM support staff with the necessary experience in immersion education. Recruitment of sufficient IM personnel should take place as a matter of urgency, therefore, to ensure that a sufficient workplace is in place. Secondly, the area of assessment is a stark shortcoming in provision for all IM pupils. There are currently no fit-for-purpose assessments available in Irish to determine general progress and diagnostic testing. In the absence of appropriate diagnostic tools, educational psychologists continue to assess and diagnose IM pupils with tools that are not designed for these populations. Research into the impact of inappropriate assessments points to the potential for under or over referral of pupils of SEN support. We would contest that the former is being seen in our system as a clear disparity in pupils in IM receiving a statement of need in comparison to those in EM. 8.3% of pupils in EM hold a statement of need compared to only 4.8% in IM. Considering the high incidence of SEN amongst IM pupils, the lower incidence of statement provides a clear indication that something is amiss. Finally, with the current emphasis on SEND placements and access to specialist provision, it is important to highlight again the disparity in provision for IM pupils. Recent statistics show that 6.5% of pupils in the overall education system have been allocated a place in specialist provision. This compares to only 1% in IM. IM schools would love the opportunity to establish such provisions, are constrained by inadequate accommodation and scores of pupils having to leave the sector to avail of appropriate provision, which of course denies them the opportunity to avail of the aforementioned advantages that immersion education presents. To conclude, I would like to return to one of my initial reports in relation. I would like to return to one of my points in relation to the benefits of immersion education. IM schools are doing incredible work to provide an inclusive environment that enables all pupils to fulfil their potential during their time at school. It is now time for the wider system to play their part in supporting these schools to ensure that every pupil is afforded parity in provision and supports their needs. Thank you.
Thank you both for your presentation. I'm weighing up whether to go with my initial question on SEN, because that was the bulk of your briefing, but also conscious, Maria, that you raised that the workforce is the sole biggest challenge facing the sector. So I think I may pick up on workforce first in this session. What would you say is your core ask to the department in terms of addressing this?
That's an easy one to start with, Nick. Thank you very much, Chair. I would say that there are many things that can be done immediately. There are things that need longer term planning, middle, medium and long term planning, and obviously investment, but there are some cost neutral options as well. I'm going to ask Orla to pick up on this because she authored a paper last year that you will have received as well to ensure effective teaching workforce in the sector.
So I would say the implementation of the recommendations that are contained within that paper, it was written in 2023 and we've made no progress since in terms of any of the recommendations that were put forward. Key areas of need would be the post-primary subject specialist route. Again, there's a clear pathway of how that would be implemented. It's just a matter now, we believe, of actually carrying out the action. I think there is also a clear need in the wider education sector for a workforce planning strategy. I suppose we were slightly disappointed that the Transform Ed strategy mentions workforce, but it doesn't acknowledge the fact that there are significant pressures that we've been dealing with for 10 years in the Irish medium sector. I believe we brought this to the table and we've presented the solutions in that regard. Just to touch on the SEN aspect, Nick, because it is very relevant, if we are advocating for teachers to leave their positions within their schools to go into the Education Authority, for example, as support staff, then there's a backfill issue there. So we need to take into consideration how many teachers we need. Again, we've presented those figures to the department, and whilst you can never be fully accurate in that regard, we believe we've laid out how many numbers we need coming through, at least provisionally, for the next few years. So we're looking at we're looking at an emergency situation essentially now, but we're also very conscious that this is only going to get worse and worse and worse, so we need to be looking down the line as well.
I noted that the department in their briefing had mentioned that they're looking at a strategy for Irish medium education, but probably at 2027 for publication. I'm going to assume that workforce will be in that strategy. You've touched on this, but do you think that you can wait till 2027 for action on workforce? Apologies.
Absolutely not. I don't think we can wait until next term. We are, as Orla mentioned, in a crisis situation. Yes, this will form. We have been informed this will form a central pillar within the Irish medium strategy, but something that we would be advocating for strongly is a need to press on with that work. We really, really need to see that before the deadline that has been mentioned. I think the other issue with all of this that we haven't maybe spoke about is the retention piece that obviously sits alongside recruitment. So that's a massive issue. We have a lot of work ongoing at the minute in terms of workload, and we all know that is a very hotly contested topic, and that is just magnified and felt so much more acutely within the Irish medium sector. And we have, I think last year when we came and presented with the team from Queen's, the research they carried out and really the dangerous situation we're in there. So we have another piece of work that has that will be launched in September. Stranmillis have just sent that to us. We commissioned it on looking above and beyond the 1265 hours. What exactly are Irish medium teachers doing that is specific to their sector, not the general piece that obviously all teachers are working above and beyond those hours, but what is specific, and how can we relate that back to the piece on whether it be lack of resources or SEN support. So we're looking forward to that and hopefully getting that into the conversation and around the table. But it's not necessarily, this is something that, as Orla mentioned, we have been struggling with in crisis mode for years, and we're delighted that this is forming such a massive piece in the likes of Transform Ed, and there has been work already has begun on looking at workforce, but it was only when it became an issue in the English medium sector that we got to where we are now. So it's about ensuring that we're not left behind moving forward. But no, we absolutely cannot wait, and there's a need to progress this immediately. And the department have said that as well, that they're not wanting to sit back and wait for strategy, that as needs emerge they will address them, but we haven't moved too far forward to date.
I'll just pick up on workforce. As you referenced it there, we have the independent review of workload that was announced as part of the teacher pay deal, and I think there was broad welcome for that across the teaching profession. Have you had any engagement around whether there's going to be a particular strand of that review that will look at Irish medium?
So I have a seat at management side, and obviously that is something that I have been raising as we go along. We have the additional piece of research that may or may not have to emerge before the official launch in September to facilitate the voice in that space. No, I wouldn't say there will be a particular work stream, but it's about ensuring that the voice is in each of those work streams, and that's something that I'm heavily advocating for. But then again, that goes back to the lack of staff. If we're in engagement and consultation mode, and there's practitioners coming in and that voice, I can't be the voice for at every single table, and obviously we rely heavily on the practitioners, but they're not always available. So traditionally it's not always easy to get people around the table, but it's a very important one and something that I'm absolutely advocating for.
Well, we'll certainly pick that up with the department. Just one final question for me, and I will link it in with special educational needs. I noted just your reference to the particular issue around lack of access to specialist provisions within the Irish medium sector. A lot of that, it appears, is accommodation related, and you've already that's an issue in and of itself. But if you're now looking to find more space, that's heightened. Where would you say that lack of access to SPIM sits with the department's statutory duty around encouraging and facilitating Irish medium education? Because you're certainly saying, and I assume there's you have data behind it, that children are leaving the sector as a result of this.
Well, I think that's the clear outworking of the lack of provision, because those children who are leaving, and we have examples from one school where 8 pupils from a nursery class had to leave that one class, and that's one school, and that's actually in an area where there is specialist provision. There are huge geographical inconsistencies. I believe from next year on we will have our first primary provision outside of Belfast, but for the for the last however number of years that specialist provision has existed, it's only been in Belfast, and it's only around social and communication where we have needs in terms of behaviour, speech and language. And I suppose one positive is that the Irish medium sector was way be on the curve, you know, way ahead of the curve. In that regard, because we had schools who established specialist provision before specialist provision wasn't a thing, and the approach to learning in an Irish medium setting is actually very conducive to that whole holistic development of the child. So we have fantastic examples of that provision and the difference that it can make. So it's such a shame that there are pupils who are missing out, number one, on a big part of their culture and identity, but also on those advantages that come along with attending an Irish medium setting. So
I was just going to add to that, you know, we do have, and obviously anecdotal evidence of parents phoning us totally frustrated, saying this is the youngest sibling in a family, and Irish is the language of our home. Irish is the language of the youth club, where all the other siblings go to school, and this individual child couldn't get access basically to the swim in his sector, and it broke the mum's heart to make that decision, and said, I have to keep the hope alive. I want to try and keep the hope that maybe they can move to post-primary when the time comes. But it's also completely and utterly contradictory to that whole conversation about inclusion. So, you know, we are an inclusive, non-denominational sector, and that should also extend to the SEN or across the board, whatever the needs of the child is. They shouldn't have to leave the sector to receive the support they need.
No, thank you for that. That's the first time I've really heard that articulated as starkly as that the lack of SPIM provision is resulting in children being unable to access their education that reflects parental choice. So that's something to pick up. I'll leave it there in terms of my questions. I'll hand over to the Deputy Chair. We'll look about 5 minutes per inquiry for each member, and if members want to start indicating now, I'll get a note. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, and you're all very welcome to the committee today. Firstly, I'd like to ask about the paper that the DE sent to the committee. They condemned CNG quite forthrightly about governance and leadership, and I know that you have been working hard to turn around these challenges. Would you like to answer the department here today? Thank you very much for the question. We were very disappointed, I have to say, when I read that report in the first instance. And I thank you for sharing that, I thank the committee for sharing that information with us. As you say, there are many challenges, and we've had many challenges. And that was a historic problem. That was something that touched many areas of our work. What I would say about that is that we have an improvement plan. It is being implemented, and we are tackling those challenges as well as we can. You will understand we are a body that is funded by the department. We have a bureaucracy that we have to deal with, like every other organisation. But being such a small organisation, that weighs on us more than it would on perhaps a larger organisation. So these things do take time. What I would say is that in the last few years, myself, since I came into the role, I recognised the problems, and I opened very transparently with the chairperson and with the board, and we put emphasis on, and we spoke to the department as well, with the permanent secretary, with IMIE, and we were very transparent about that. And we put together plans, and we are working through those plans. We have a way to go yet. It is hard to do these things from one day to another when you have the weight of other work to do. It is even harder to do this whenever I'm going back retrospectively trying to fix things as well. really, and that has been the case since I came into my role. Since I came into this role, I would say 95 or 98% of my time has been spent on this. That leaves the whole sector being left without my attention, without the attention that I would like to afford them. So that it does weigh heavily on me that is the case. But I have to say we are working our way through this, and really in what the department said, that work didn't come across in what they said, and they didn't describe in any way all the achievements that we have made in the last 18 months. And an interruption, and some of the information in that report wasn't completely precise either. So it deals with, really, it concerns a lack of personnel on our end. So have you... So we did have a conversation with the chairperson, and we expressed our annoyance that the report was not completely accurate. And it didn't give an insight of the journey that we have travelled. We did express that to the permanent secretary. And we told her about the amount of the time that this took away from us being able to deal with SEN and other issues affecting the sector. But it was clear that we were achieving our goals, and we asked the permanent secretary to make this clear. The permanent secretary apologised and said that they agreed with us that the thing here is that we're not trying to hide anything. We've been very transparent, and we want to continue on that vein. Thank you. One other question I have. Whenever the officials were in here last week, I noticed that your budget will be cut, a real term cut, as they say in English. What will be the implications of that cut? What does that mean for the organisation? Will you be able to undertake your work properly if there is a cut? Thank you. We don't have enough resources at any time to undertake all our work. As the sector grew, our team actually shrunk. There will be implications, of course, with regard to our work, and whenever there will be a pay rise later in the year, something that our workers, of course, deserve. We have. So we will have to look at the way we conduct our business. We will not be able to go out meeting people, going around the schools. We will have to do it online, something which really isn't the same whenever you're dealing with challenging issues, or when you're trying to deal with a new community who are looking to set up IAM provision. Thank you very much.
Deputy Chair. So the next indication is Kathy.
Dave Carja, I just got a million mail for your presentation. So bra Orm for the interruption there. For some reason my phone is ringing on my laptop, don't know why. Look, thanks a million for your presentation there, and I suppose it gave us kind of a stark reality of the situation. Can I ask though, I suppose I want to focus around early years in Irish medium, and We hear time and again from settings around the lack of resources in Irish, and specifically around that immersive kind of, that at home and stuff like that. What would your assessment be on that, on the state of the resources?
So can I just confirm, when you're saying resources, do you mean physical teaching and learning
teaching
resources,
and learning
or
resources,
the workforce piece, which
Well,
is
there's
also
the
the human
workforce,
resource, which is a massive barrier as well?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, conscious that we have a sister organisation, Altram, who are the experts in the field with early years, but of course we work closely with them, and we obviously liaise closely with our Ní Scoileanna as well, both statutory and voluntary. I couldn't think of the English word there. That's my excuse. Obviously, what we would argue is there are no resources available that are state of the art, fit for purpose, coming out from anywhere every day and daily. So I know Altram, for example, make a lot of their own resources, and they spend a lot of time and energy doing that. And obviously, there's a piece there on quality assuring that and making sure that that's entirely aligned with international best practice in terms of immersion education. So they have a huge task to do there on their own. Across the piece, I would say we're lacking in every sort of resource you can imagine, and it's so crucial in those early years. A lot of, not sure if the most current figure, but historically a few years ago the figure was about 95% of our children are coming from homes that don't have Irish at home. So that whole language modelling piece, that those early years are critical for that immersion experience, and you need every resource under the sun multiplied by 100, because you only maybe in a lot of those places in a lot of those settings have 1, 2, maybe 3 if you're lucky adults in the room to model that language. So it's so important to have access to technology and all of those visual and audio visual aids that will help to support the journey, and they're not readily available as they would be. And even if you look at the wealth of resources available online, they're not available in Irish. Orla, do you want to add to that?
I would say we're guilty as, I suppose, possibly an organisation, as a sector, because the focus is on primary, because there is such a big lack of primary and post-primary that the early years may be forgotten in terms of resource allocation capacity, because we're trying to fill those gaps as not as a priority, because the early years are equally as important. But whenever we're looking at early intervention and how key that is, it's a huge area of concern in relation to IME. We've highlighted that there's also an area of significant development needed in terms of health provision, from birth, and we're at the awareness raising stage in terms of what bilingual pupil needs are, but there aren't really the mechanisms in place, to spread that word as widely as possible. We're aware of work ongoing with DE and Altram in terms of speech and language provision, for example, and there's one Altram officer who's funded by Sure Start, so we can cite positive examples, but they need to be rolled out, broadly. And Altram have recently very recently they've been funded to create a training programme, because this again is a workforce issue. We are really severely lacking in appropriately qualified workforce in the early years. So with the rollout of that training programme, that needs to be funded to be delivered effectively and adequately. So I would say that it's an area where we need to make sure that we as a whole system are focusing, and it's included from the beginning, because as I say, it has possibly been an oversight previously, so it should be given the attention that it deserves going forward.
Thank you. And you mentioned there about those positive examples being rolled out broadly, and we've been waiting now for the childcare and early learning strategy coming out, and this is a key example of something that needs to be included within that. Has the department been engaging with you directly on the strategy, and is there any tangible outcomes that you can see that might be included in that? Or need to be included? Sorry.
We have engaged, the department have engaged with ourselves, and have also heavily engaged with Altram on that, and we have been involved in that from the beginning. I think uptake initially in the initial cohorts was very limited because of the capacity. The accommodation played a massive piece on that. Schools been able to have the space to extend those hours when they're using that space in the afternoon for something else. So absolutely there's work ongoing. I think it was slow to start, but it is so needed in our sector. It's so vitally important, because longer hours is longer access to the language that we're modelling, and it's all about immersion, is about being immersed for maximum periods of time. So it's something that we greatly welcomed and look forward to a greater rollout. It was just that initial piece, and rest assured that the voices are there, but again, it's will they be heard and will they be reflected in what we end up seeing at the very end.
You mentioned.
Right, just very briefly to finish,
Thanks.
Kathy.
Okay, thanks, sir. You mentioned there, and it probably is a bigger, wider issue that will need teased out longer, but it's around the estate and the fact that I think it was 60% of the provision is in temporary buildings. What impact does that have? And again, I'm talking about early years, but I suppose in a broader piece, what impact is that having on the growth? And we had a budget briefing there where I think even the maintenance programme is going to be cut dramatically too. How will that impact on you?
So it's absolutely and utterly crucial that we understand the link between the poor accommodation and the impact on the ability to deliver the curriculum appropriately, the broad range of the curriculum. So if you're in a situation that, as I was in a school quite lately, and this was the maintenance log from January, I think it wasn't even from the start of the year, that is not only absolutely and utterly unacceptable. I would say I've been in many examples where we've had to go and immediately address serious health and safety issues that, EA come out and the school is told that's cosmetic. And then we visit with the department and the department go, absolutely not, we need to address it. And it was addressed, but how many other schools that we're not in and out of every day are getting that piece? So that's taken priority. It's taken attention away from the main business that our educators are supposed to be doing, which is delivering the curriculum, giving schools the opportunity to avail the children the ability to avail of all of that. So we're not in a situation where every school has libraries or even a space to expand or to have outdoor play or it's just very, very important. I think one of the biggest examples is children not having a space to receive support when we do get the specialist support. They're sitting in corridors and every child's walking past them and everybody knows, such and such is getting support. So, and it also, I know I'll finish, but it also has a massive impact, I think, on staff morale and staff retention. And you know what, despite all of it, we're still growing, which is testament to the massive and brilliant work that's going on in schools, because parents are driving past brilliant new buildings to come into the wee huts that are falling around them, and then also staff are too. But that eventually will, like any of us, that will wear on you.
I think workforce and accommodation are kind of the threads that run through the evidence. So other members may pick that up, but we need to close that one at this stage. Danny, you had indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Just to sort of go back on what the chair started off with the SPIMS. We know so many children will be sitting right now without a place in school. I'm just wondering how proactive are the EA themselves, and I know you've thrashed out a lot of the restrictions that you have with accommodation, but how proactive are they actually being to establish SPIMS in Irish medium sector?
I would say from the initial point of contact with pupils, we would have concerns around the data collection. We've asked previously if there could be a mechanism on the dashboard, for example, that could gather the parental preference for Irish medium. That hasn't to date been included. So we would cite that there's significant unmet need out there that we're not aware of because there isn't the data capture. There's data. I don't think we have assurances that data is being looked at on an Irish medium and English medium basis. I know we talk about sectors within our wider education sector, but we come at it from the perspective of there's English medium and there's the delivery of the curriculum in English medium, but that is significantly different in Irish medium, and that determines how education is going to be delivered in that classroom. When it comes to special needs and placements, like we've said, we have an awful lot of, we can't tell you how many parents have left the sector because we don't have the data capture for it, but we know anecdotally that it is significant. So I think if we're looking at a solution, it's to start with the data capture And then we also have instances of parents being advised to leave the sector because educational psychologists, whilst that narrative is improving, it's not where we need it to be. Still have the, I suppose, the misgiving that attending an immersion setting would exacerbate a special educational need, and the default position will, especially with private educational psychologists, will be, I wouldn't go down the route of immersion education, that's only going to make things worse, send them to English medium. I've already touched on geographically, there are areas where specialist provision just does not simply exist, so they have to go to English medium. So I suppose there's the whole myriad of issues around that, but at the end of the day there are pupils who are being separated from the rest of their families, and also then not getting to avail of that opportunity in their lives.
And as far as some of the solutions or even the short-term solutions, like data collection would be one of them, is there any others that you would recommend that would need to happen that can improve SEN within Irish medium?
Generally? Yeah, well, I think everything goes back to workforce. So if we don't have the workforce available with the knowledge and expertise of how Irish medium education works, then we're always going to struggle with directing and signposting and supporting and intervening appropriately. So we need to start looking at recruiting at least proportionally to match, the population of Irish medium pupils that we have within our system. Now there's a whole retrospective element here of historical under recruitment, so workforce is going to be key. Assessment is a massive issue, and in the absence of appropriate assessment tools, again, we're not getting an accurate picture of what a child's needs are or a young person's needs are.
And I suppose I'll give you my opinion on that first. Like the Minister's SEN delivery plan, it has a very brief sort of reference and bespoke services, and I suppose that would be what you were saying earlier, you'd be taking teachers actually away. So my last question would be, like, in your opinion, do you think the Minister's plan actually addresses any of the concerns or make life any way better for children and for the schools in the Irish medium sector? So I suppose it's important we did engage positively with the department through the end-to-end review of SEN. We had a dedicated officer who liaised with Comhairle na Gaelscoil Oireachta to understand the Irish medium specific issues and feed that back into the findings of the review. So that was positive. We welcomed the delivery plan. We would welcome the acknowledgement of the delivery of bespoke Irish medium services, but we are slightly concerned over that were appropriate, because we don't know who decides what is appropriate. If it's ourselves and the sector and the research that is now available, then that we will go in the right direction. But again, we're not aware of what those mechanisms will be to ensure. We don't know if there's a budget behind this, and of course the budget is going to be key in delivering those services. I think now that we're at the delivery stage, it's critical that we're at the table. As an organisation, we want the department to be knocking on our door constantly and saying, what do you think about this? How would this look in Irish medium? What do we need? Is that taking place at the minute? No. So I think on a general note, and just because it's important to feedback what we're getting from our workforce, there are concerns around how feasible the delivery plan is in terms of the workload that is on practitioners currently, on staff within the wider education sector, but obviously that's exacerbated in the Irish medium sector. TPL is really important, but it's difficult enough for a teacher to get through the school day as it is without having to go and learn themselves afterwards, and then have the time and space to bring that back into their classrooms and actually implement it with pupils. We've seen that as practitioners ourselves, so I personally would have concerns around about where the emphasis is here. I would have liked to have seen us going down the multidisciplinary route of schools where, as we've seen in the south, where the classroom teacher has a whole workforce around them who's located within the school, be that peripatetic support based on site that can take pupils out as and when is needed. Allied health professionals located within the school. So I would have advocated for that, and I did advocate for that approach. But and I think there's still time and space and scope for that to be implemented. But I believe that would be the best way forward.
I would just add there on the SEN reform agenda, we've been advised that an outcomes framework is coming so that we can measure this. And one of the key parts of that plan is getting the right support, but also in the right place. And you've mentioned that for some of the children who would want to access Irish medium, they can't get that in the right place. Would you like to see one of the outcomes in that framework in terms of measuring actually what provision is actually put in place to allow the right place support in Irish medium? Is that something that you have engaged with the department or would like to see? I mean, I'm not asking for a detailed answer, but just to get your sense on that.
Yeah, I suppose a very short answer is when we had sight of the delivery plan, we said you could go down through this plan with an add-on specific Irish medium needs to every single element, and that's where we see our role in facilitating those conversations. We're not experts by any means, but we can liaise with experts who can advise accordingly. So yes, I think that's extremely important.
That's helpful. Okay, Peter, you had indicated next.
Thanks very much, Chair. And just noticed you've gone very Johnny Cash today in the suit choice.
Wasn't expecting that, Peter.
No, I imagine you wouldn't. Orla, I read your paper. I think it was yours, Assuring Effective Teacher Supply in the Irish Medium Sector. Is that the one you were talking about earlier? That's fine. Because I was quite interested, and my computer's just now reset, so just give me 1 second here, dig this up, but I've written it down. Just on the workforce issues in particular, which seem to drive through a lot of the evidence that you put in. And I suppose I just got 2 questions, and one of them was around that high attrition rate. So when I looked at your paper, it said around the high attrition rate, especially in the primary sector, you cited 3 reasons. Teachers choosing to go to the Middle East, so there's more money there. Teachers choosing to go to the South, or some teachers going to English medium schools. I mean, I suppose my question would be, would you accept that those are what I might call external environmental factors? Those can't really be attributed to the department or EA. That's just the sort of teachers are qualifying, and that's just what they're deciding to do. Would you kind of accept that?
I think we have to accept that because that's the case. There's no denying that. But what I would say is that when you look at Irish medium, so if I'm an initial teacher undertaking an initial teacher program, if I'm going into English medium, there's a skill set that I'm developing there that is specific, that is broad, can be applied in many different jurisdictions. But if I'm going to an Irish medium course, that's a very specific skill set that is specific to this jurisdiction. And so we are actually, as a system, investing in a skill set that is then disappearing. So I don't really think that that's financially effective to do that. So I think that's where we would make the case to the department. I don't think that EA really have a role in this regard at initial teacher stage, but afterwards in terms of supporting the workforce. So I think in that regard, why are we continuing to fund places without the protections that the expertise that's developed within those places stays within the system? So I would make that case.
It's a sound point, and it's just difficult to ring fence that. I mean, what we're discussing around high attrition rates and workforce could be applied to other sectors. Pilots, for example. So I know the RAF, if they train through pilots, they got to stay there for 5 years. Doctors is another case where again, you put people through med school and maybe they work here for a while and then they go to Australia or they go to the South. But it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult then to sort of say, well, it's quite restrictive to say if you're going to study here, otherwise it might make all the sense in the world. If you're going to study here, you're going to get your Irish medium education here, then you got to stay in Northern Ireland and kind of deliver that. I suppose it's people's choice whether they go to Saudi Arabia or South Armagh, I guess, But I had one more question, if that's okay, and it was just around the SEND figures. So just from your evidence, according to the figures, 23.3% of pupils in IM are recorded as having special educational needs, and it compares with 19.8% in EM. And I accept the argument completely that actually some of the Irish medium schools, consistent amount of the Irish medium schools are in areas, super output areas, deprivation. I accept the relationship between the two. It was a further paragraph that was sort of raised my eyes when you cited that 5% of pupils in IM have received a statement compared with 8.3% in English medium. I thought, when I read that, I thought, isn't that great? That's really positive. I think you kind of phrased it, maybe in the evidence and also in what I saw there, as like kind of a negative. But those figures would be exactly where the reform of SEN would want to take us to. That's success. So I was quite curious why you sort of phrase it or put it together as like, you know, this is quite bad, you know, look at the comparative nature of it. Do you want to address that?
Yeah, so I think the end of that paragraph does also cite the need for research, because we need to have an evidence base around, is it a good thing? I hope it is. I am fully confident in our schools that our schools, our practitioners, our workforce are supporting the needs of Irish medium pupils effectively. Without them, God knows where, you know, they're going above and beyond, and then that's adding to their workload and the stress and pressure that they're under. But so firstly, we need the evidence base. Secondly, I think that there's something there. There, you know, when we're looking at assessment, if we're not adequate, or if we're not appropriately identifying what people's needs are, then we are doing those pupils a disservice. So
No,
we're hoping to address this through.
That's fine. No, I completely accept that. I mean, there could be two ways of reading that. One is they're not being assessed. You know, the kids are there and they've identified special education needs, but they're not being assessed. And that might be down to, are they being assessed? Is the facilities there? The other way to read it, I guess, and it was what I just wanted to put you in just a highlight, is that in line with the SEND reform agenda, that's exactly what we want. What you're achieving is what we want to see. So I was just curious why it was therefore sort of framed in it, this is a problem, whereas actually I looked at it and thought, actually, that's where we want to get to. It might be through lack of assessment, or it might be that something else is happening that actually explains the differentiation between figure A and figure B.
Maybe a bit of both, but we need an evidence base to clearly lay that out.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Peter.
Johnny.
That's not going to become a thing, Peter.
Hansard got that.
Cara, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, or should I say Johnny Cash. Look, I'm so grateful to the panel for being here today. Every time you come here, I feel like I learn something new, and just the level of detail that you've provided there around the SEND needs and the complexity and the depth of the inadequate amount of funding that IME gets. I just have one question. I was reading through our pack there, and the piece of research from Queen's, which was from 2023, called Fair, Shared, Supported, Examining Expectations and Reality for Irish Medium Practitioners. And it touched on one of the key issues being the challenge associated with identifying and using appropriate materials and technology. So I read that, and then one question I was going to ask you along those lines is, I was also reading the Reviewing the Review, and recommendation 19 talks about supporting Irish language in the home. So I'm just thinking, my question is essentially, there's been no progress on supporting children learning Irish at home. According to recommendation 19, it was in the red. Is there more we can do with technology to support children learning Irish at home? I'm particularly thinking of those kids maybe whose mummy or daddy don't speak Irish. They want to help them with their homework. Is there something we could do there in the digital space to support our parents and support our children who are taking their homework home? That's kind of a broad question, but any guidance you can give on that would be great.
So I think COVID really highlighted that need, and you know, the system worked very quickly to put things in place. What we need now is the formalisation, I suppose, of what we've seen. AI is under development. You know, I think there's a need to figure out what the possibilities are, so that's something that we can keep in mind whenever we're advocating for, you know, the necessary resources. I know that's come through in the 1265 research piece from Stranmillis, that it's something that can be used to support teacher workload and alleviate pressures as well. So I mean, yes, it is an area of need, but it requires the relevant funding. We've been advocating for a long time that we need a dedicated, we have SIA and we haven't ASHIANed, but we need an appropriately funded resource body, and I suppose without something at the necessary scale, there's only so far we can go. So it's really funding dependent.
I was going to come in briefly on that as well.
Absolutely.
If I may. So during, actually, as a result of the work we did after the COVID, or you know, in the aftermath of COVID, when we were still maybe in lockdown periods, we advocated and were awarded additional funding. The sector was awarded additional funding in recognition of that piece on language acquisition and the difficulties surrounding that. And one of the things that we discussed at that time was the ability to do something around the digital space to support parents. Now, it didn't go forward because I think there was so many conversations about the breadth of it. It's such a massive need. I know in Scotland they have a particular organisation, Common and Parent, that's set up to support parents whose children attend Gaelic medium schools. So it's something that we absolutely feel is a gap, much like early years in that space. It's something that we don't have the resource, and we haven't had the capacity or the role to go in and support parents in that space, simply in the recruitment piece and all of that. But it's something that is definitely needed, and an investment would be required there to support parents, to help parents feel equipped to support their children. Although schools are brilliant in that space too, and and again, we're back to the workforce piece, because the schools have to pick up that slack. Yeah.
Just off the back of that, I was reading as well, Scotland does a really strong and good job when it comes to teachers and bursaries. What would you like to see from here? I'm mindful we have the department after yourselves. What would you like to see? What could that look like?
I think one of the initiatives that's worth looking into in Scotland is the probationary year. So where I know Peter had raised, investing in keeping people within the jurisdiction. So the probationary year in Scotland is, ensures that everybody coming out of the IT programs has at least a 1 year post. So that's something that's worth looking into. I know that from recent reading, I don't know how successful the Scottish initiatives have been in general in terms of retention. So it's also worth looking at learning from their mistakes as well.
Absolutely. No, that's very helpful, ladies. You've answered both of my questions there. And again, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
You, Cara. I don't have any other indications at this stage, unless anyone else wants to comment. Michelle? Yeah.
That's okay. Thanks so much for your evidence, guys. We've covered a lot of ground already, but there's a few things I guess I was going to pick up with you. Some of the challenge you've mentioned around workforce obviously then links as well to what subjects the kids that is available to them in post-primary school, around even kind of vocational and technical qualifications. What are the challenges that you're facing in the sector around that? You just perked up there.
That's a big question that I'm going to pass on to Orla.
So the vocational area is one that is very difficult. The sector was in a crisis situation a number of years ago when vocational qualifications were pulled by an organisation. They had to work really quickly to identify another provider. The provider currently is located in Wales. There is always the chance that could be pulled again, and what does the school do? They've now invested a number of years in developing that provision, so it's always a serious risk. And at the end of the day, at the end of that line is a pupil who has put time and effort into a qualification. I would cite a really positive example within the sector with College Firstja and their provision with Gael Courtesy. So one of the fantastic statistics that we can cite in the sector is that College Firstja has 0 to maybe 1 pupil who leaves their 5th year or upper 6th provision. Upper 6th, that's a really old term. So I don't even know what the post 16. I thought I was showing my age there.
And Davis of the right vintage. You
know what I mean.
Well, I've come old.
So they have 0 pupils, or have had in the previous years, who are not entering further education, university or training, because they work on the ground with every single pupil to identify a pathway for that pupil, which I think is just a testament to that school. And they have Gael Courtesy who work with them to meet the needs, who develop courses nearly on the spot to ensure that everyone coming through from that school has an avenue. But they do that through their own dedication and hard work. It's not formalised, it's not funded in the way that it needs to be. So
you see the move towards keeping pupils in education and training until they're 18. Does that give you any hope that you might see some improvement here, or just that'll get worse for those kids?
Well, I think it's two-pronged. I think we have fantastic examples that the Department of Education should be looking to and trying to emulate within the Irish medium sector. And then I also think that there is a critical need to address the lack of vocational, you know, the formal vocational qualifications that are available to Irish medium pupils, because at the end of the day it's an equity issue. If you're going beyond vocational qualifications, you know, we have examples where our post-primary schools can't offer specific subjects that are integral to the entitlement framework. And again, that's because they're not being facilitated to do so. You know, they are doing everything that they can within their part, but they need that departmental and wider system support to enable that to actually take place.
And I was going to just add to that, Michelle. I think because of the fact that, and it was up until last year, there were 0 NEETs in College Park, and as Orla said, just 1. I don't think that'll have a massive impact on our sector in many ways, on the ground in schools, because I think that's the experience from our experience, that's what's happening anyway, that these young people are staying on and pathways are being identified for them and tailored to them. So I just want to say that.
That's good. I guess that there's so many things to ask. I mean, in terms of teacher training then, is there anything that you think at the teacher training level that would help them with the workforce? And also, we had a visit recently to an Irish medium school who talked about the potential around secondments to help with getting teachers into the Irish medium sector. Is that something you guys would be supportive of, or do you think that there could be some immediate remedies that would help with the system now in terms of secondments? And also then, if you're doing teacher training, is there anything in terms of how courses and teacher training is structured that again could help improve the stream of teachers coming through for Irish medium?
Time's reasonably short. There are a lot of questions there, so do your best.
I will say it's really difficult to, and I'll let Orla come in, but it's really, really difficult to get everything that we need to do done. Yeah. We need to do. I'm just thinking, I came through it. I don't teach it, but I came through it. It's very difficult to get everything that's needed, that is required to be taught in a PGCE year done for any subject. Add in the immersion piece is massive. And you could maybe argue that we maybe need a longer course, or there's many arguments and schools of thought out there. But also then add in additional that we would need in that space. That would be, to do like a workload. I know in the initial piece, it's just, I think there needs to be a review of all of that, how we look at IT and all of that, to reflect today and the reality.
Just really quickly so you asked if we would be in favour. I think we should be in favour of any type. Any informed type of initiative that has an evidence base behind it. But I think as a system, we're quite risk averse. I think it's okay to roll something out sometimes that maybe won't work, and that we're able to reflect on it and say, well, that didn't work. Why did it not work? And what could we do differently? So secondments, yes, why not try it? Because it may make a difference. We don't know. Yeah. So I think we should be open to anything that we can make a strong case for.
And I'll not name the school in question, but the principal, because it may give away the area, and with some other schools being discussed, but they referenced attempting to arrange a secondment, and the principal at the other end of the line, I think, nearly fell off their chair of like, you're going to take the teacher away, and didn't actually accept that it was a possible thing. Now, I think it did actually end up going through, but I think there's a need for a policy framework to actually give permission for this, and for schools not to feel threatened that secondments should be a normal part of of the sector. So.
I was going to say on that point, this is an issue that relates to governance in the Irish medium sector as well, and the fact that our schools, about 80% of them are other maintained. So that means, as in the case of VGSs or GMIs, that the governors are the employing and managing authority in that school. And that leaves it really difficult, because sometimes we're in a position where people are leaving on maternity leaves or other things, and we've jobs to fill, and we would like to be able to offer secondments, and how can they come in, because that's how we could get that piece over the line with all of that work, curriculum, SEN. But that makes it difficult for a set of governors who don't have HR expertise, who don't have access to HR support through EA, who don't have access to legal advice through EA the way other schools either have through EA's CMS, or in the case of GMIs and VGSs, get an additional funding line to pay for that. Irish medium governors don't have that, so that has an impact on their ability to even, I know the other piece on the other side, but it's the ability and the knowledge and the support within the sector to say, what creatively could we do here together?
that is already helpful. I don't have any more indications, so we'll bring that evidence session to a close. And look, thank you for your time. And I just want to put on record my thanks to the translation service as well for facilitating the session. And we've got the officials in next, so there's plenty to pick up on. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
So that concludes that session. I'm going to suggest we probably pick up any concluding actions once the department has been in, unless there's anything in particular that either through yourself, Clark, that you want to raise. We'll move on to the next session then. So just whenever we can bring the officials through, I'll introduce the next item. So item 7 on the agenda is an oral briefing from the Department of Education in relation to recommendations for Irish medium education. Refer members to a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 79 and the briefing paper from the Department of Education at page 80. So we'll just wait for the officials to come through, and then we will make a start. Afternoon. I'll just let you get seated. So joining us today we have James Hutchinson, Director of Collaboration and Climate Change in the Department of Education, and Maurice Girvan, Head of Irish Medium and Integrated Education Team in the department. So you're both very welcome. Thank you for joining us today. You are also up next on the agenda on another briefing, so I'm just checking in terms of how you're structuring this. You're going to cover the Irish medium issues as a standalone briefing. No, that's fine. So on that basis then I will hand over to you for any opening remarks you want to make of up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer, and as far as possible, if we can keep to 5 minutes per inquiry for each member to make sure everybody gets the opportunity to raise their issues. So for members and witnesses alike, to keep things nice and succinct. But over to yourselves. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So good afternoon. First of all, thanks to the committee for this opportunity to update you on our work in the department on taking forward an Irish medium education strategy. We have noted several research papers, I know you're aware of those, and reports that have been provided, and about a number of recommendations in Irish medium education. Most notably the recent report from CNG around the 24 recommendations in the Review of Irish Medium Education report from 2008, and then the Reviewing the report produced I think earlier this year and launched by CNG. We're also aware of the recommendations in those reports and the issues more generally encountered in the Irish medium sector. The Irish medium sector in Northern Ireland has experienced significant growth in recent decades. I think overall growth in the sector in the last 10 years has been 57.8%. And one thing that is apparent is it would benefit from a comprehensive coordinated strategy, which is why the department elected to take this forward. And we really see this as a need to address the growing demand for the Irish medium sector and to make sure the challenges faced by the sector are recognised by the department and actions taken where necessary and appropriate. So the Minister approved the development of a strategy and action plan in February, and we have now a small team taking that forward, and Maurice leads that particular strand of work and he's here today with me. So I say we've begun already by forming a steering group and a working group. Our working group met first on the 25th of April this year, and the steering group is going to be set up to provide strategic direction and oversight, and the working group really will be meeting to discuss issues as they develop and then developing an action plan to support the strategy. And we've also kept this reasonably straightforward and streamlined, so we've developed a list of consulted stakeholders who will give input on areas of expertise as the review continues. So just very briefly, working group is comprised of key stakeholders in the sector. So we have CNG, we have ourselves, the Education Authority, SEA, and practitioners from nursery, primary and post-primary schools, and we have the Control School Support Council and CCMS as well as Altram. So it's a reasonably wide body that has an interest in the sector. So at this stage, very early days, first meeting was only about 2 weeks ago. We're currently working to agree the key areas that we focused on in developing the strategy. So there's a fair amount of research available as a body of work to start from. And at this stage, we've looked at a few key pillars, very much early days, and that will be developed as we go further. So first of all, recruitment and training, curriculum and assessment development, sustainability, growth of schools, pathways, and then supporting students with SEN and SEND. So that's not exhaustive, but it's a start, and that's what the strategic group will look at going forward. So first and finally then, it's our view that a department-led strategy will be welcomed by the stakeholders in the sector, and we're very keen to ensure that the voices of those involved in the sector are heard and contribute. And we really are very much welcome a co-designed strategy and action plan to be developed. So recommendations from the strategy will essentially the way to look at it, really, we're looking at short, medium and longer term objectives. And again, there'll be low cost, medium cost and high cost, and that will form part of the action plan. I think the point that we want to make is that this has to be reasonable and affordable, and we have to be able to do things at a pace that we can manage and with delivery that's actually reasonable and achievable and affordable. So that's what we work with. So we're doing some other work in the areas of Irish medium education as well as just the strategy. So we've been working with CNAG recently around the issues of demand for Irish medium education in the west of the province. And we're also working closely with CNAG around supporting their effective delivery through a partnership agreement. And we're also in the very early stages of working up our engagement and consultation protocols around wider policy development as it affects the Irish medium sector. So this means that anything happening in the education sphere more generally will have been examined through the Irish medium lens within the department, and that would make sure we discharge our duty under the Act properly and fairly. So in summary, we're very aware of the issues faced by the sector as a whole, and we're committed to develop a strategy and action plan to try and take that forward over the coming years. Hopefully mid to 2027 will be the delivery date. So that's the end of my opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you for those opening remarks. I wanted to raise the issue of workforce, because out of the issues that you've highlighted there, and even in looking at the strategy development, workforce wasn't directly referenced, and apologies if I missed it. But that coming through from CNAG's briefing, they were quite clear. If they had to pick an issue that was most pressing, it would be workforce.
We covered that under recruitment and training more generally, so that would include retention and workforce issues more generally. So that is one of the pillars, if you want to call it that, of the strategy.
They also highlighted, like it's reassuring to know that's the case. They also highlighted that while they welcomed, and were very clear they welcomed the development of the strategy, that they don't feel they can wait to 2027 for action on workforce, because it really is at a critical point. Can you give us any idea of what the department is doing to address that critical pressure of teacher supply in particular in Irish medium schools?
I think one of the points of the strategy is we would not be waiting until 2027 where actions could be taken in advance that would tie in with the objectives of the strategy. And so you'll be aware of the strand of workforce planning that happens in the department, and that strand work's taken forward on the part of the department, but that does include looking at the issues faced by the Irish medium sector. And in fact, we funded some work last year through the Fresh Start agreement that CNAG completed around the issues particularly affecting teaching in the sector. And so they have an information set now from research that will feed into that programme. So that's how the department will take that forward specifically.
Can you give more specific actions in terms of what for members to take away today? What specifically will be done if we look even if we're saying 2027 feels too long to wait for action within the next year? What steps can be taken to address those issues?
I think the way we're looking at this is there is a general shortage of language teachers in the wider field of those we can bring into the sector. That is an issue for us, and then that's compounded again by the fact that those who are competent to teach in the medium varies is a smaller pool. And you've noted that we are in a competitive market for teachers. We train teachers to a standard, and then they can go off and work elsewhere, and they often do. I think one of the points that was made recently by Peter Finn was that they often come back with extra skill sets, so it's not their loss forever, but they do often, teachers will go away, work for a while and come back out to the sector. So in short, we will be working with our colleagues in the department to see what specific issues we can address in the Irish medium sector. I think there's two things here. There's access to the teachers themselves, and then there's the willingness of teachers to stay in the sector and teach, because they could, when qualified, teach anywhere and not necessarily in the Irish medium sector. So that is an issue for us to consider. I don't have any particular action specifically that we'd address quickly. That is part of the wider workforce plan at the moment, though.
I think that will be concerning, I think, for some people listening to this committee. I think anyone who's working in the sector where they feel that pressure within their own school.
There are a number of proposals in the workforce strategy that will be also applied to the Irish medium sector. Plus also the work that's been done by CNAG and the recommendations that are in that will be feeding into that overall strategy, and also the Irish medium strategy.
It's again I'm just really trying to pin down that understand strategy development doesn't happen overnight, and that and a long-term workforce strategy would absolutely be welcomed. Be that embedded in a wider strategy, but it's just to get a sense of what actions are on the table in the here and now? Are we looking at secondments? Could we look at a bursary to incentivise teachers teaching in the Irish medium sector? Are we looking at initial teacher training? Are we looking at a post-primary B.Ed course with Irish as a component of that? Are there any specifics here? These are some of the things that are floated. But
they're all.
What's being taken forward actively now out of that list, Steve?
I think at this stage it's exploratory at this point. They'll have to be examined and worked out what we can actually do. I mean, for example, the cost of setting up a B.Ed course, and it's not something I think is particularly straightforward. Again, if you offer incentives for teachers to come into a certain sector, there are issues there about parity across other sectors. So these all have to be looked at in the round as part of the workforce strategy itself, which is where that's being examined. So it'll be difficult for me to say now that I want to advocate for X, Y, and Z because it's part of the wider structure across the whole teaching profession. So you're absolutely right. There are a number of things that could be done in this specific area that would apply possibly to other sectors as well.
I'm not hearing anything too specific there, but I'll move on. We also touched on workload in the session previous, and very clear that there does seem to be a specific issue there within Irish Medium, with the independent review of workload being agreed earlier in the year. Is there a specific strand that's going to look at those issues within Irish Medium in relation to that?
I think the point about workload is there is a perception, and it's been held out by the evidence that was presented by CNAG at I think it was last summer, the report. The issues really are, as I understand it, that there are additional pressures on Irish medium teachers around materials, certainly curriculum materials and so on. We recognise that. We will look at that as part of the overall workload issue, and you're aware that there is a review of curriculum being carried out at the moment as well in the department by an independent reviewer. Irish medium have fed into that as well, so they are all being put forward at the moment as to what, certainly from our perspective, having engaged heavily with the sector, the preparatory work that Irish medium does seem to be certainly initially at least higher than others, so we have to take account of that as part of the strategy in terms of the recruitment and retention piece as well. Yeah.
Will the workload review have some recommendations arising out of that, which we hope the Minister will take on board? He has given assurances that he will take on board those recommendations. Will there be Irish medium specific recommendations?
We'll certainly be discussing that, yeah.
Okay. Final question from me, and it's I've got a SEN angle to it. There was discussion around specialist provision in Irish medium and the lack of access to that, and that actually drives children out of the system, and they end up without a choice, without an option of being able to choose Irish medium education. So I have two questions really on that. In terms of the statutory duty to encourage and facilitate Irish medium, where does that sit if we're not providing that specialist provision for children who need it in the Irish medium sector, and then beyond that, what actions are you taking to try and improve that situation?
I mean, there is a departmental SEN strategy at the moment, and there's a strand of that with the Irish medium sector, so that we are aware of the issues there. Marsh, you've been engaging with that. Do you want to give
there's a separate group actually, in addition to the strategy group and the working group, that are looking specifically at SEND issues, and they're looking at the recommendations. There's also quite a body of work that's been carried out by CNAG already on that area, the provision of special education needs and disabilities in Irish medium education. So there's a number of recommendations that are in this, that committee, now it's only met once so far, but they're meeting regularly as well to take that forward, and that fits into the SEN overall strategy. And if there's any shortfall in terms of Irish medium, then we can look at that as well within the Irish medium element of the strategy. It's one of the main, it's one of the chief pillars.
There's a sense that I'm getting, and see that CNAG, and I know that some of this is resourced by the department, and I'll welcome that in terms of a lot of the research work. So there's really good research work comes forward, and we've all attended the launch events here at different papers that provide really good articulations of the challenges, lots of recommendations around the solutions. What I'm hearing today is CNAG have made good recommendations. We're looking at it, we're working through it. I'm just feeling there's a lack of specifics here. So I mean, just to go back to SPIMS, it's been articulated to us that there is a serious lack of SPIM provision in the Irish medium sector, that is impacting on families' ability to choose Irish medium provisions for their children. I'm really looking for an answer as to what is the department doing to address that disparity in provision, specifically what is being done.
Well, I'm not best placed to give an answer on the wider SEN approach to the department. I know the department is looking at SPIMS across all schools, and one of the biggest spends of capital is on SPIMS in schools. I can certainly have a look at the analysis of what the difference in terms of availability is and come back to you. And that's not something I've looked at specifically ahead of this, so we can take that away and look at it. But I think in general, one of the things that I've certainly noticed, you're absolutely right, in the Irish medium sector, a lot of work has been done in enunciating the problems. I think one of the things I noticed when I came on board was, well, we need to now get to a process of moving beyond enunciation of problems towards developing a plan of action to address those, which is what we're trying to do, developing the strategy, working it through, and then coming up with actions at the back of it. So it may look light on actions at the minute, and the answer is yes, it is, because we've not yet got to the point of deciding what we can do within an affordable framework and timeline. So that's possibly, maybe addresses that point of yours a second ago, where we're at the process, very early days in the process, is where I would describe it as.
I would comment the issues aren't new. The issues are not new, so perhaps we should be further on in the process than we are. But I'll leave my comments at that stage, and I'll hand over to the Deputy Chair for the first question.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I want to raise an issue that I raised with Cordia when they were in around the briefing paper in which the department was very critical of Cordia in regard to governance, communication, and leadership. As far as Cordia are concerned, they have regular, transparent communication with the department. Mm-hmm. Did you disagree with that?
No, and I do understand the point Cordia made. That particular paper was an internal document that was, as I shared, in error. But the point is that we have got to the stage now where initial issues that we had with Cordia, and they would recognise it themselves, to our mind, are now close to resolution. And we're actually quite close to completing a new partnership agreement with them in terms of how we engage with them. So I would say that the relationship is good, and we don't have significant governance issues at this stage with Cordia.
And why the need then for this briefing that was extremely critical?
It was an internal
at this particular
piece,
time. If you're saying you're close to, resolving whatever issues were there.
It was an internal piece that was in the department. The language was probably not something I would like to have gone out. It was issued in error, and it shouldn't have been done. And we are in regular discussions with Cordia around governance issues on an almost daily and weekly basis. So I would have no significant concerns at this stage about how things are managed.
Right, okay. We just seem to be hearing regularly from officials, Chair, that parts of documents that are sent to us or briefings or so on, well, that part shouldn't have been there, this part shouldn't have been in that paper. It's strange, but in any event, when did the Minister decide that he was going to have an Irish medium strategy?
February of this year.
February this year, so only a year after he came into post. And why has he identified as mid-2027 as the time to publish it?
We looked at the available, well, if you take the timeline back to the development of a classic strategy, it would probably take about 3 years, just given research and so on. Because there's so much available research at the moment that we reckon we could take a year off that because there's so much already been done. So that was essentially an estimate on our behalf based on what a normal strategy would take from inception to having a plan.
Right, and I want to go back to the issues that the Chair was raising with you. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a problem. The workforce in the Irish medium sector has been identified for a long time as a particular problem within the sector. Mm-hmm. Well, we're waiting on this strategy being published, and we're given a timeline of 2027, mid-2027, when the Minister might not be there. What's being done in the meantime? Can you point to any initiative that's being taken to help to try to resolve the workforce problems that exist?
I think, as I say, the workforce strategy itself has been taken forward in Irish medium is a strand of that. Certainly, it would be quite difficult for me to say there's anything specific going forward at the minute because it is a part of the general strategy for the workforce, full stop. What we would hope to do in developing the strategy is be able to feed into that with the specifics of the Irish medium issue, access to teaching, the retention of teachers, and that links to the overall general lack of language teachers. So that's part of that. But in terms of specific actions right now, no, they're being developed, if you like.
Yeah, well, I mean, if there's a shortage of language teachers, then you need to develop some sort of initiative to try and attract graduates into courses. So, despite the difficulties that we know that have existed for quite a long time, there's no actual specific initiative at the moment to try and deal with the problems. Is that what you're telling me? Yeah?
And part of this process is to work out how we can get that initiative developed as part of the workforce strategy, feeding in from our work.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. David, you indicated next.
Thanks very much, Chair. My question, to be honest, is a bit of an aside to what the Chair was speaking about earlier, because it was the retention piece that was part of the previous session there that got my attention. This might be a question, the first question might be one that's not for you, and I understand that in asking it, but you may have some insight into it. And it's, in terms of teacher training, to what extent is there direct or indirect subsidising of teacher training? I maybe should be aware from previous sessions, but it's not something I have on the top of my head.
I have to admit to not being an expert in this. I would not like to misdirect you by giving you the wrong answer, but what I can do is take that away as a question, and this is the funding towards
as it
teacher training.
As it is currently,
Right,
both, any direct or indirect support in terms of how we fund teacher training. I guess I was talking to a colleague during the last session as about whether, and I think this is the case, that a teacher going through university, are they paying basically the same as anyone else going through university in that regard, or is there a support and subsidy, and what way is the state supporting it? And I guess it goes to the point that my colleague was talking about earlier on, is that where there is state support and investment in someone, particular job, particularly for a specialised pool where there's you would like to think, and we've heard about it in the health context in terms of golden handcuffs and all the rest of that, and there's different views on it, and I'm not certainly not outlining party policy in this, but it does seem to me personally that where there is investment, there should also be responsibility that for at least a short period of time, that the role someone's being trained for is open to them. Now, that's not to say that is the case, but it's just a point of interest, because, as you said, there isn't necessarily a lot of financial resource out there. It's not a case that we can, compete with the Saudi Arabias and elsewhere that people may go and teach in. But it's then looking at what else we can do, both carrot and stick, I guess, to ensure that where there is specialist posts and we're investing in them, that they are available to our schools in that way. But except I've heard happy to hear any further ideas that you have in terms of how we can support retention without resources being what they are. But I think what you're saying is that that's probably at too early a stage for you to outline that. And
yes, I think what I would say is there are models available to us to look at in terms of, for example, there have been various cases where STEM has been attracted by, as you said, incentives. We're not saying that's the answer here. We're saying there are a range of issues to be looked at as part of the workforce strategy around more general. But the point is absolutely right. It is a free market in that respect. You train as a teacher or as any other professional, and you then are open to take a job, unless the conditions of your training specify that you have to. So that at this stage, that condition is not there.
In some ways, I wouldn't want to limit people's opportunities, but at the same time, if those opportunities are coming at state investment, then the state needs to see the return on that. Otherwise, we're just throwing money in the black hole.
I think the point is that there are methodologies that would encourage without necessarily doing that as an approach, because that would be quite restrictive. But I'm sure there are other means that could be looked at. I wouldn't want to come out and decide what the winner is, but there are certainly things you can look at in terms of how you retain staff in any profession.
I wanted to say, from my own point of view, it was a pondering based on the earlier discussion, so it's not an outlining of policy necessarily, but just interested to follow that up. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. Kathy, you'd indicated next.
Thanks, Chair. I earlier, whenever Sina G were in, I had asked them around early years, and they had stressed how important that was when it's important in all forms of education, but in terms of Irish medium as well. So I just ask how this strategy will focus on early years.
We have the early years practitioners as part of the process for this, because it is evident that the earlier you become immersed in a language, the better the outcomes are. So we will need to, there has been a growing number of schools who are setting up in the Irish medium with preschools, and the strategy have to look at how we support that. You're absolutely right, because one of the key elements of educational outcomes in this is that the earlier you immerse in the language, the better your language skills, and therefore the better your educational outcomes. So we recognise that, and we will take a look at that in terms of what additionally we can do to support that sector.
And I know, because
Altram's also sitting on the working group.
Yeah, well, of course, yes, Altram as well.
You'd mentioned there a couple of times, there's no actions, but surely you've identified what the issues are in early years. Do you have any information on what the issues that are identified in early years within Irish medium?
We've certainly had anecdotal evidence put to us, anecdotals that generally these are relatively small units, and sometimes the accommodation is not the best, so that it's common to the sector. You'll be aware of that, and we'd have to look at that's part of the more wide strategy around how we support the infrastructure of the sector, and certainly the allocation and the access to good sites on which they can carry out their work.
Just another couple of things Sina G had mentioned as well. Yeah, the state and the state of it actually was one of them. The workforce, obviously, as well. And then one of the key things was the teaching resources, the actual lack of teaching resources as well. I know Altram doing a lot of work around that too. So I just curious as to how this will link into the childcare and early years strategy that's being developed that we're going to see in the autumn. You know, seems to be two separate pieces of work. One's not the 27, one we're hoping to see in the autumn. How are they linked, or how are they going to join together?
I think the point is that the Irish strategy, the Irish medium strategy itself, will be finished by that stage, but we're feeding in all the way to everything the department's doing that has an impact on the Irish medium sector. So, for example, the early years strategy, we'll be discussing with them how that particular piece of work takes account of the particular circumstances of the Irish medium sector. So it's not that we just wait for a final answer. The process is to engage across the department in any policy area that impacts or impedes on the Irish medium sector.
So there should be actions that we will see coming out of the early years strategy then, specific to Irish medium?
Certainly hope so, yes.
It's the same with SEN as well.
Yeah.
You know,
there are strands of
there's
those.
Lots of different strategies that are independent to this strategy, and this is going to pick up any shortfalls in many ways and feed into effectively all the other strategies that are already ongoing.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Michelle had indicated next.
Thank you. Thanks, folks, for the evidence today. There are a lot of recommendations about Irish medium in your briefing. I'm not sure many of them would be very high profile or specific within the Transform Ed paper. What kind of role do you guys kind of take to champion Irish medium across the department and in those kind of documents?
It's actually quite an important role of the steering group for this as well, internally, for us to make sure that we are, and the steering group will be chaired by a grade 3 in the department deputy secretary, so it's a senior officer who's looking at how the department itself assesses the impact of policy on the Irish medium sectors. That's part of the work we're doing. In terms of the Transform Ed, I think one of the things that piece is that it wasn't sector specific, so it didn't refer to sectors, it referred to the overall system. So, but I mean, there will be, as that process works through, the Irish medium elements will be fed into the outworkings of that to make sure they're taken account of.
Okay. And then just in turning of, they've talked a lot about accommodation in terms of the sector today. So what are the routes in terms of producing development proposals and getting new skills actually commissioned for the sector?
This is one which is quite complex because depending on the nature of school, so for example, if you set up a new Irish medium school, that will be what's called as other maintained. It's effectively the same as a grant maintained integrated or a grammar school. So the school itself is its own managing authority. So that does provide its own issues because there's not a single central body looking after the interests of the sector, for want of a better word. So that, again, that is something we'll be looking at. Is that the only way? Is there a better way? That's one of the questions we'll examine.
Okay.
Danny, you'd indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I suppose just listening there, there's an awful lot of onus on strategy, very little actions, and considering in your opening statement that you said that the growth of the Irish medium has been going on for decades. And just come back to what the Deputy Chair, what Pat had said around, mid-2027, call me a wee bit cynical, like that's after the next election, and fair start, Transform Ed, even the independent review of education was quicker. Is there reasons why, with all the evidence is there, that there's really taken so long to have actions?
There's no particular reason for this being timed other than as I've described. This is something that as I came into the department, a number of years ago, I took on this particular role about 18 months ago. And one of the first things that I realised was that there was not a strategy for the Irish medium sector, so we went away and did some thinking about it. What we come up with was a plan we put to the Minister. We have a limited resource ourselves in the team. We're not the biggest team in the department. In fact, a third of the team is here at the minute with me. And so what we're trying to do is to make this as effective as it can be, and that means we need to plan it properly, which is why the strategy has a timeline. We'd hope to exceed that if we could. And equally, if things can be actioned as we progress through the process, we would do that. So it's not going to be a delivery date where everything starts at once. If we can make movement on issues that we're aware of before that date, we'll certainly do that. So it possibly looks, in terms of the phraseology, maybe more fixed than it is in practice.
it's also going to go for public consultation, and all of those stages will take time to go through as well.
Mm-hmm. But it does feed into the lack of prioritisation that has went into Irish medium education over the past number of years, if not decades. Because when we look at the accommodation, over 60% of it is in unsuitable accommodation, really. And then picking up on what the chair said and what we heard, like, we have families out there with children who have special needs. The language of the home is Irish, where that child is then having to be educated outside of that there. And then obviously parents who don't have Irish, then that's limited. What is the department actually doing in the short term to address that, particularly around the SPIMS?
I know you've heard from capital colleagues recently around this table, and there is a capital plan that the department has, and it does have a focus on the Irish medium sector's needs as part of that. And you'll also be aware that we are extremely pressed for resource at the minute in terms of capital and resource budget. So we would like to do more, and there are a number of schemes in place already where the Irish medium sector is receiving money from both the major work scheme and the minor work scheme. So there is money being spent there. I think over the last 10 years it's something around about 24 million, 25 million. Now, that sounds like a large number. I know that it isn't in terms of the needs, but we are trying to, as it were, prioritise where we can. And we have, there is the issue of new schools being established, the issue of capital to fund that, and the issue of those schools, if they are vested, the fund being replenished to fund more. So there is a process there, and there's I can't explain it in great detail, but there's a capital fund that refreshes when a school is vested, and then that capital goes back into the fund to fund more. So let's say a school wasn't sustainable, the capital fund would then cover that, and when it is sustainable and vested, the fund is then refreshed and more schools can be assisted. So there is a process there in the capital side of the department. I can't explain it very well. I know the basics.
We've had briefings, and we're doing a big massive shortfall. Even within capital, I think it was 83 million we were told last week will be the shortfall. But then it comes down to Minister's priorities as well, and what he wants to spend his budget on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Danny. No other indications, so that brings that evidence session to a close. So I think for Maurice, that's you off the hook at this stage. James has to stay on for the next briefing, but we will just tidy up actions then before we bring the next official in. So you're welcome to stay where you are in the public gallery, wherever is easiest for you, or
talk to my colleague outside.
Yeah,
okay.
That's fine. So just in terms of actions arising, members, I think there are a few things that we would like to follow up. I think from my perspective, that issue around the SPIMS, I would like to get something specific coming back from the department around how they're going to address that, because there does seem to be a clear disparity there around that the statutory duty to IME, and if that is we've got a scenario where certain parents are not able to send their child to a school in that sector. I think we would want a little bit of more detail from the department around that. So I would like to suggest that as an action to seek more information on, if members are agreed. Other than that, I'm happy to open up to other members, and indeed for the clerk to highlight anything that we might want to follow up on there. So,
there was just the idea of incentives, given the urgency that the witnesses represented. And there are other sectors, I suppose, science and sectors like that as well, where there is really dire shortage. And, so maybe it is something that the department needs to look at in terms of a programme to incentivise and offer retention, things that make people want to stay.
Okay, if the members are agreed on to follow up on that. Just looking at some of my Chair,
oh
yes, Cara, please come in.
If I could just come in. I'm just curious about the bursaries piece. Is there anything, are we aware of anything that's happened before, particularly with promoting, people to go into the Irish medium sector? Is there anything we have to hand or we know of? No.
Not to fair to the clerk there, I'm not aware of anything, but
no, I'm not aware either, but we can certainly ask that. I think that's in
I'm just thinking, because it always is that good incentive to get young people thinking about it, because I do know some council areas have really strong Gaeltacht bursaries to help young people get involved in Irish, so that might be something just we could get a wee bit more detail on. That would be great.
Yeah, and also whether there are caps on the numbers of teachers trained.
to David's point, really, I think there around that and any subsidy of teaching places, I think it would be good to get clarity on that. I just referring back to my notes actually, there was the issue also of the outcomes framework for the SEN reform agenda, and as to whether or not the department has given any thought to there being specific outcomes relating to Irish medium, just given the very high prevalence of SEN in that sector that they highlighted. Again, if members are agreed on that, and also on workload. To see whether or not, I don't think we got complete clarity on that, but is there going to be a specific action arising out or actions in terms of the independent review of workload? Again, if members are agreed, we pursue that. Okay, that's fine. Well, I think that closes that briefing session, and that moves us on to the next item on our agenda. Before we do that, I just want to check, our members looking for a comfort break, or are we okay to proceed?
I'm going to go anyway.
Okay. We'll take a comfort break. We just turn off the live feed for a few minutes, and then we'll move back into the next item.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29.
Okay, that's us back into open session. So, members, that moves us to item 8 on the agenda. It's another briefing by from the Department of Education. This time, it's an update on integrated education, and particularly the Vision 2030 strategy. I'll just let the witnesses get seated. We have had officials in relation to integrated education fairly recently, but as some of the same personnel were here today, we thought it would be appropriate time to get an update. Would just remind members, as we did last time this issue was on the agenda, that there are judicial reviews live and ongoing regarding the integrated education strategy and decisions on Rathmore Primary and Bangor Academy transformation. So we'll obviously need just to be careful we don't stray in too much detail into that territory, and obviously the clerk or officials can keep us right in terms of where we're able to go on that. But I'll just again welcome officials. We have James Hutchinson back with us, so thanks for making the journey back into the committee room. Director of Collaboration and Climate Change at the Department of Education, and Adrian Murphy, Head of Integrated Education Act Implementation and Climate Change Team in the Department of Education. Conscious that you have briefed us on some of these issues fairly recently, so really feel free to cover anything that you feel is new or of particular focus at the moment, and then we'll move into question and answer from there, but over to yourselves at this stage.
Thank you. I'm going to address my opening remarks really around the strategy and its contents, because we've given you a more general briefing than last time, so thank you very much. So following, I suppose, extensive engagement with all the stakeholders, so we had the NICE, IEF, CSSC, there are statutory consultees as set out in the Act, and we have now a draft revised strategy. that's been published for public consultation. We called it Vision 2030, a strategy for integrated education 2025 to 2030. It was published on 27th of March, and the return date closes for that on the 23rd at midnight. And so essentially we then hope to consider those responses relatively quickly and attempt to have a document to the Minister quite quickly afterwards, hopefully published by June of this year, all being well. So really just on the strategy itself, the core of the strategy really focuses on delivery of 19 key actions around the direction of travel for integrated education in the period up to 2030. It also sets a number of new targets that have been developed to support the implementation of the strategy, and this is something that's worth just focusing on. So we said by 2030 we will aim to achieve a reduction in the post-primary gap between the percentage of first preferences for integrated education being met. It's currently 87%, and the Northern Ireland post-primary average is currently 90%. So that's one of the issues that came up to the consultation, of that gap in the first preference choice. And we've also said that by June 25, which is really quite quickly, we will consider the impact of admissions criteria on parity of access to integrated education and deliver a DE policy paper for the Minister's consideration. And that's supported by some of the feedback we've had already on our survey of those who have recently used the process of transferring between schools. So we have data on that we can discuss a wee bit later on. And we want to then say 90% of schools in the first 5 years following a transformation are using the framework to develop high quality integrated provision, and that by March 2026 80% of eligible integrated schools are engaged in the Excellence in Integrated Education Award scheme. So those are sort of benchmarks for the system to show that they should be achieving those targets. We've deliberately kept those reasonably small number of targets in the strategy because we have a huge range of benchmark data as well that paints a wider picture of the sector in terms of performance, and it would enable more informed decision making and more adaptive approach to strategic delivery. So there's that plus a wide range of data we can talk about as well. And so the revised draft strategy includes the Department's definition of demand, which was a point we discussed the last time, and it was drawn up building on work done by ARC and reflecting on comments from ICIEF and others. So demand for education then is the level of support and desire for integrated education by parents and their expressed preferences for school admissions. That's our measure of demand. Now within that measure, we take the view that, and support again by the ARC study, that demand comprises two distinct elements. We've termed those societal demand and behavioural demand, and we've defined that societal demand then is the evidence of demand taken from a Northern Ireland-wide survey of parents on their desire for integrated education and the factors they consider when expressing school preferences, and from parental ballots held whenever transformation proposals are taken forward by schools. And behavioural demand then is evidence of demand indicated by school preference as expressed via the school admission system at entry to preschool, primary school and post-primary school, and that was done by surveying parental inclinations and aspirations of parents from ballots held to consider transformation. So two things there. The first one was the Northern Ireland Life and Time survey. You'll have seen that go out in the early part of the spring, and we asked a number of specific questions around people's preferences for integrated education at societal level. And we have issued a number of weeks ago there a survey to all of the parents of the 70,000 pupils who are taking part in the whole school process of admissions. So we have a robust set of data there. We have quite a few returns already from the school admission survey that we're working through, and that will form part of our we hope to publish that in June, yeah, and that will be published. It'll be published annually. In fact, so we'll have an annual build-up of data on both those surveys so we have a longitudinal survey over time on both those questions. So in parallel to that, we've been working to develop and refine the strategy and action plan. Again, consulting with the Section 3 bodies, and really they've worked with us in terms of the demand for integrated education and helped with us in terms of the questions that we asked and how we framed those. Again, we have that short consultation. We made the consultation questions quite short in the survey to parents. We wanted them to actually be able to think that they could fill it in reasonably quickly, and so we actually got a very good to date feedback rate. We'll not say what it is at the moment because it's still live, but it will give us very robust survey data we can then take forward and work with. So there's about 70,000 people per year to survey, and we have issued a number of reminders as well, so we give them every chance to come back and complete that information set. So this is the key part of us meeting our obligation to identify, assess and monitor and aim to meet the demand for integrated education. So essentially the primary focus is asking parents and guardians whether they have a preference for integrated education, what factors influence their school choice, regardless of selection made, whether they would prefer their children to be integrated in schools or would they prefer any other type of school. So we've used that type of questioning basis with the advice of our statisticians and colleagues. We've also asked parents about the impact of admissions criteria on their preferences as they've expressed them in that particular last set of admission criteria. And that data will actually help us on the paper for ministerial consideration we talked about just a moment ago for this coming month. So again, that's using information from live returns from parents. So that survey also closes on the 23rd of May, and so we're talking about a publication date in June. And we also will have access to the Northern Ireland Life and Times results, which are available later this month, and we'll publish all those when we have them. And actually the NILT survey itself included questions on preference for integrated education, and including what factors were considered when deciding what schools they prefer their child to attend. So that's a societal level question as opposed to the actual physical question. And again, we also asked if your child did not attend a school, would they have wanted their child to? And would they also want their child's school to transform to integrate? So all those questions were placed at that level, and we're going to get some good feedback on that as well. And finally, we're also looking at changes to the existing DE transformation guidance, which is called Integration Works. That's been used by schools since 2017 when they're looking at the possibility of transformation to integrated status. And this has followed a series of engagements with ourselves and NICE and the Education Authority over recent months. So we're now at the stage where we're about to launch that particular piece of review to our Section 3 consultees for their comment, and hope to have that back to the Minister in due course, as that will be forming an important part of how we have addressed the action to improve the transformation process. I think there was some work published last year by IEF based on Queen's research that respondents found the transformation process complex. Part of this is to make that process more understandable and speed up the process, hopefully. So that is essentially a quick summary of what what the strategy has changed and I reflect. And I'm happy to take any further questions. Adrian's here to answer any of the hard ones.
Thank you. And look, it is welcome from my perspective to see the demand, the work being done to monitor demand. I think it seems that feedback's been pretty positive in terms of even just how accessible the survey was, and it seems to have been well received in that regard. I suppose for me the question is then what is going to be done with that data. I think it is genuinely positive that we're going to have that data, but it's what happens next with it. So practically there's a suggestion it will inform area planning, for instance, but can you give us more of a specific idea of what, once you have that data set, what are you going to do with it?
I think it's part of a continuum of information available at the area planning stage. So you're taking an area plan decision, a DP decision based on what information you have. So if you have good knowledge on parental preference in the area, good knowledge on demand in the classic sense, if I would like to send my child to an integrated school if there were one, that's really good hard information, because the survey return we think is a very good rate of return. It's statistically well above what we consider a good survey. So this is really robust data that we're taking on board at that stage. It also helps schools to, when they do want to think about transformation, to know their base from which they would draw their pupils, because we can break this down to postcode. And so there's a very rich data set available for us, both for us as the department and for indeed the sector more widely, because we will publish this information on an annual basis.
And can we be confident around how that process will work? I mean, we've already, legal action notwithstanding, and if there's anything you feel you can't comment on, I understand, but we've already had a process, and this was highlighted last time that you were in, whereby there was an issue around undersupply of integrated education in a particular council area for post-primary. The largest post-primary school in that council area, and indeed in Northern Ireland, had already got a live transformation process going, and it didn't progress. The minister said no. Do you think that there is an issue that despite all this potentially really good and useful comprehensive data that we may get and feeding that into area planning processes, that if the confidence in the system isn't there, that schools that put their head above the parapet to transform will actually be given the opportunity to do so? I mean, is that something that you're aware of, and how is it the department, do you manage that? I'm
answering quite carefully. I'm not referring to the individual cases. Yeah. What I would say is that in the case for change put forward by a school, it's very important that this information helps that case for change. Knowing, as it were, the pool from which you're drawing your pupils is helpful in terms of how that school could then enunciate to us how they were planning to improve the position of whatever the minority group they wish to include in the school is. So knowledge is important. That would help them in drafting their case for change and indeed help through the transformation process. And I think as well, it's not yet finalised, the transformation guidance will also help that, process for schools. The aim being that information is there to enable good decision making to be made early, and then a really strong bid to come forward. And that's really as much as I can say in terms without going any further.
When do you anticipate the transformation process review will be complete? There seem to be two elements to it. There seems to be the sort of initial bit in terms of the current departmental guidance, and then a wider review. When do you anticipate those will complete? Because I mean, I think the date of March 25 was suggested.
Yeah,
obviously
we did have
past
initially
that.
An earlier date that has, unfortunately, due to staff resource issues, stretched a bit. But the intent would still be that we have that publication relatively soon, next month, ideally. Now we've just this afternoon, I think, we're going to write to the Section 3 consultees and share the documents with them. We expect that to be quite a short process because we'd ideally get comments in, we'd ideally get this process underway and make it start.
And I welcome sort of the notion of trying to make that process more straightforward, because I know the feedback from a lot of schools is that it is an onerous process currently, it can feel like a huge administrative burden, particularly on principals, I think, who end up carrying that. But I think for me it again goes back to confidence, and it's really just to get that sense from your strategy document there. It suggests that the purpose of that review would be around promoting the expansion of integrated education.
I think
there's a concern that I'm hearing that actually the transformation process review might actually put more barriers in place and make it more difficult, and have maybe more onerous criteria that have to be satisfied before.
That would not have been the intention of the redraft. The issue really was it is a process. There is a process to go through, and it is an onerous one. I think the point is that the way we have redesigned it, and not going too far, this is not yet published. It should help schools. It should clarify matters earlier in the process, and it should actually take some of the burden away and make the process more streamlined. And certainly, to my mind, it's an enabling issue rather than one that would make it harder.
We'll wait to see.
And you'll see that in due course.
Yeah,
so
no,
that
sounds positive.
Yeah.
Okay, just one final question. Conscious that with the rollout of the strategy in whatever its final form takes, has a budget implication. There's resource required. Sense certainly from the budget briefing we got that NICE, who will be the key delivery partner in this for the department, a static budget at best. Mm-hmm. Are you confident the resources there to actually deliver this?
We have to look at that as an issue, because one of the things in the strategy actually is us to review what we need to deliver it, including the role and the functions of NICE. So we would have to look at that in detail. I can't say now that look, in ideal terms, we'd have more funding available. We are in a very tight financial position. I have to recognise that. We have maintained NICE's budget for this year, and we are looking towards streamlining the process of transformation. So the hope is that the process is both improved and more understandable, which would obviously encourage people to take up the process. And we also look at the resourcing available to NICE and what if there is a gap, examine that and see what we can do about it.
And from your perspective, in terms of your area of responsibility, would you be in a position to be looking at business cases for additional resource for NICE to actually ensure this is delivered and not just an aspirational strategy?
I think the point is that the action plan, it has to be deliverable. It can't be aspirational. If there's an issue of resource, we'll have to address that.
Okay. Deputy Chair, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I suppose one of my issues with the strategy and the action plan is that there's a lack of clearly defined targets and timelines for implementation and so on. And going back to the point the Chair raised around transformation and the need to make it less onerous for schools that want to transform, is there any suggestion that this transformation process could be accelerated as such, and that adequate and appropriate support could be given to schools and parents in situations where schools want to transform?
That is actually part of the process that we set out in the revised transformation guidance. So we are looking at earlier information provision, and we do have an assessment of what support schools might need. So we are looking at that as part of the transformation guidance, yes.
And is it your expectation when this is rolled out that it will become easier for schools to transform than it is currently?
My view is that the process will be much, much clearer for schools, and there'll be much more of a process of engagement with us as the process rolls out than it currently is. So I think yes, I think it is designed to make the process more straightforward, more understandable.
Okay, well, we'll wait to see that anyway. And in terms of the demand that we were talking about earlier, and you've used the two surveys, the societal demand and the life and time survey, and behavioural demand. And I suppose there's always going to be a big gap between those two figures. I suppose one of the reasons the behavioural demand is going to be much lower is because parents who live in an area where there is no integrated school don't have that option of being able to select an integrated school.
We've covered that within the survey in that we're asking parents, despite no matter what school you have chosen for your child, what would you have preferred?
Yeah.
So you can tell that somebody in BT7 would have preferred to have an integrated school and they didn't have it. We can actually also tell what sector their school child did go to and therefore have a lot of data on that. That's why we are coming to the position of saying we will be able to know where there are areas across Northern Ireland where there are pockets of demand for integrated education. What we don't know will be we know the overall scale from a survey, but you don't know whether that leads to a sustainable school and the drive for that within it.
Yeah. That would inform, Pat, any DP that was brought forward in that area. That would be really good data that would support a potential DP that would come forward, for example, in an area where there isn't current provision. So that's the intent of having that set of data there.
Yeah, and I mean that data is always going to be useful, but what sort of needs to be involved here as well is some sort of timeline, and within the strategy and the action plan there doesn't appear to be any sort of timeline as to when we can safely say that parents who want to send their children to an integrated school will have that option. And I'm talking about a realistic option. I'm not talking about sending them on a 2-hour bus journey in the morning, 2 hours home in the evening.
I think the target about equalising the access at first preference, it's a bit complicated, but it means exactly that, Pat, that if you have demand, the target is that we would want to make sure that if your demand is for integrated education, you have as equal an access as and other choosing to maintain, to control an Irish medium or whatever, subject to the need for reasonable transport distances. So that is a quite tough target. It's a single, and there aren't very many targets in it, but that is a very tough target because we have data which says we want to equalise it, and if we have underlying that data which shows demand, we have work to do across our system.
And in terms of methodology, Pat, the issue would be that having identified areas where there is a lack of provision against a known demand, then the department and NICE would essentially place a call for transformation to invite schools to consider whether they should transform to therefore then begin the process of aiming to meet that demand. So that is the continuity of demand, action, and then potentially transformation. So that uses the existing process, but you have a much better set of information at the start to then inform the next two stages.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, Deputy Chair, David, you were next.
Thanks very much, Chair, and I'll steer away from the reasonable numbers issue that we've raised in previous occasions on the basis of ongoing litigation. But I will turn to sort of Pat's talking about access to it, and I looked again, and I've seen them before, the maps of where the schools are, and it's quite obvious, and I've raised this with NICE and that when I've talked to them as well, that it's very weighted to the east, I think, in terms of density. Now, I'm not trying to mislead anybody. I understand that the east is generally more densely populated, but I think we have one in Fermanagh. I don't think Fermanagh and Tyrone are much less dense than villages in the Arch Peninsula, for instance, and you can see a difference there. Is there a focus then on understanding for those who wish to grow the integrated sector, why it is that the West has been less susceptible to growth than the East in that regard?
Again, it is a lot of it comes down to population density, and the eastern seaboard being the most populated. And when you look at the west, you do have the county towns, and demand tends to focus in and around those. It is a factor of geography as well as everything else. It's quite difficult to get below that and try to understand what other societal issues are at play there. We certainly haven't been able to gather any evidence that would indicate less of a preference in one area because of its particular locality.
Can you attempt to gather any evidence as to it? Or
The survey of parents will gather that, because you have that, you'll be able to tell how many people in, BT 68 and 69 in Tyrone have an aspiration for integrated education as opposed to somebody in BT 20 in Bangor. So we can tell that, and you'll have that information and they may well be different. But we'll have.
And I'd say I recognise, even looking at it, the density, and of course in and around Belfast in particular. But I think even if you take Belfast out of the picture, there seems to be at least a trend. That's all I was sort of drilling into. I do understand that the East is more populous in that regard, but I don't think that necessarily explains the whole issue, which is why I probably was interested in it. But perhaps something we can look into, and there'll be more information.
I think one thing, David, is that we'll have information as to what people's choices are. We may not know what would have caused them to make those choices necessarily, but we'll have much better information than we do now. So we'll know, for example, whether you decided your preference was to have a good school, or I went to that school, or my other children at that school, or as opposed to I want integrated education. So we can draw all those things out, and that will give us something of an indication, but it may not necessarily give us all the underlying decisions behind that. If you know what I mean?
And it may well be that parts of the Irish Peninsula, for instance, that are referenced, there'll be parts of that are more generally mixed areas, and therefore I'm not suggesting that there's one particular reason for it. It just was something worth, I think, drilling into. The other thing, and I suspect you'll make me wait for the answer on this, as it says by December 2025 you'll be establishing a reasoned ethos in terms of what it is that makes integrated schools are unique in some way. Have you any insight into how that's developing and what it is exactly that makes an integrated school unique to other schools?
This is a piece of work we haven't really commenced yet because we're trying to get to this stage first, so there's a bit of a piece of work to do there. But it really is around what is the difference in integrated education as opposed to and other education. So it's around the whole issue of how the integrated sector addresses difference. And we have essentially that mission. It's not just about you must take the 2 or 3, whatever the strands is, and actually address the reasons for difference. That's part of it. So we'll be looking to work with NICE on that particular aspect and try and develop.
You'll be aware with getting into the aspects of the debate that we talked about. But the part of that is sort of if you do have a particularly low population of one side of the community, then there's very little that you can find that makes an integrated school different than another school, in terms of we often put it back in terms of the ethos of respect and understanding and tolerance, and sometimes they'll say, deliberate. That's something I feel that is in most, if not all of our, I'd like to think it's in all of our schools. So it's just about identifying, other than the name, what it is that makes this sector different, particularly in the sense that I feel, and others may not, that there's a privileged position given at times.
Yeah. So we will look at that, and there is some research internationally we can draw on around what level of the minority group would need to be in place for the culture. So there's lots of work we can look at and drawing that research forward. So we are looking at that. It's planned. It's not yet been phased, but it is in the. Yeah.
No, and you've said that in the. I do understand that it shouldn't be ready yet, but just in terms of insight. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
David, Michelle, you'd indicated.
Yeah, look, I think we've covered most of the key issues around concerns around targets, concerns around that this will be implemented with pace and with, I guess, the objective to deliver on the strategy. So I think the first question is just really assurance that there will be momentum behind this. I know I'm covering a bit of the ground the Chair did around investment in that. But just that is a genuine concern that people have, that to get to this stage has been quite delayed. So will there be
yes. Well,
change, I suppose?
Certainly from our perspective, we've got to the stage with it's not been straightforward. There's been a lot of, I suppose, stakeholder involvement. We've now got to the stage where we do have the document that we have consulted on. We have consultation responses, more are coming in. It's difficult to say what the response rate is to date, but I mean, I was certainly, from what I've seen so far, there's fairly broad support for what we're putting out there. It's not all in yet, so we'll expect more in the coming days. I think the point is we are ready to move quickly. The process that comes next really is what happens, and it's in the document, what happens to address the known issues in the areas where there is no provision. And we said in the document that place a call for transformation. That is the next step. And the sooner that happens, the better. And that needs the transformation guidance to be in place first. So we're all working, putting all these things in place to be able to go with that as soon as.
Okay. I think I'll probably pick up a wee bit on what David said in terms of, I guess, this continuing narrative that there's no real difference between an integrated school and some other schools. They will push back that there's very much that deliberate ethos is very much a conscious thing, and it goes beyond just the ethos in terms of the provision of certain subjects, sports, etc. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because we've had the guys in from the Loom as well. We had a really good session the last time we were in. I think they were really clear and articulated really well what that difference is and how there is a distinction. So, but to keep having to come back and kind of restate that, I suppose, is a frustration.
One of the reasons that we put the action to put that piece of work in place was to have that on the record. As this is what the position is around ethos. So we want to do that work. We want to spend a bit of time and do it right. That will include listening to people, including those you just mentioned, around what is the unique issue for the integrated sector in terms of its offering. And we do need to look at that, and we want to give that the proper time and consideration.
Yeah, because the issue of governance, for example, how those boards are composed is very different from others, and again, it's the deliberateness around that. So I think hopefully this process will, I guess, educate people further on what is the true situation in terms of integrated education. Maybe perceptions can be challenged around that, because there is a very distinct identity within that sector that, you know,
I think
people are drawn to for very deliberate reasons.
One of the reasons, quite rightly, that we reviewed...
And it's more than mixing, sorry.
It is. One of the reasons we reviewed the transformation guidance was to make it very, very clear that becoming an integrated school is, as you say, more than just changing the name above the door. It's about a whole process, and that's why the transformation process and the steps to the transformation guidance, when you do see it, when it does come out, hopefully will make that clearer in terms of just what the process, the front loading of the process, the fact that we're, you know, everyone goes in with an open set of information in front of them and they know what they're doing, and it's not just make a few small changes. It's about the process, and it should be. I think when you see the transformation guidance, I think it would help that seeing where that fits in the process. Yeah.
No, it's encouraging the things that you're saying. I think again, just pushing back on that idea that it's just counting the number of Catholics and Protestants. There's way more to it than that. I think the strategy, there's a lot of positives in it. So well done. Don't think anybody actually said that yet. So well done again. Thank
you, Michelle. I have an indication from Cara if you're ready to come in.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear and see me okay. Yeah, I just have the one question. Thank you so much for being here today and giving us a lot of detail. It was just around the public communications and engagement plan, and what I found in my time as an MLA, the public messaging of integrated education, I've always felt could be a bit stronger, a bit more clear and concise, and that's something parents struggle to sort of navigate when it comes to integrated education. And I just saw there that the communications plan is due out in September of 2025. I'm just mindful it's May, and I would hate for parents to really not know what's available to them, to fall into misinformation online about integrated education. Is that something you have concern about? I know you're conducting qualitative and quantitative research. I think it's due to be released June 2025, but just within the next sort of 6 months, what kind of messaging will you be putting out there?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've already done, or the EA have done on our behalf, is to make sure there is a portal part of their EA website which gives a very good good information on what an integrated school is, and on the other school sectors that we have, because they recognise that's an issue for parents. It's an issue, you know, as somebody who came into the department not that long ago, it's an issue for me trying to understand the differences between our various school sectors. And as a parent, and I'm a recent one making these choices, you don't understand what the difference is. So we were trying to do that in a way that's good and communicates that information as best we can. But there's more to do, and I think the action here is simply saying, look, we need to work with NICE to make sure that ethos is communicated, and what the differential is between them, and how they are working. You know, they work within the same shared curriculum, etc., but how they are doing something within that they feel is for the better in terms of overall mutual respect and understanding.
Yeah, I think it's really the urgency of that as well, because you don't want parents to have that misunderstanding, as you say, of what integrated education is or what's available to them. But no, that's brilliant. And I'd imagine then, will that include sort of like stuff on the digital space, social media, that kind of thing, letting people know?
So we've already got that within the EA's website, and we'll work with NICE to update their website and provide information, and they are an information point anyway for parents. So it's a bit about signposting when people look for integrated education, that they get to the right information, as it were, and that's how we want to make sure that our resources are used as best they can to get the message across.
Okay. Well, look, that's it from me. The rest of my questions have already been answered by yourself, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Cara. I have no further indications at this stage, so that does bring the evidence session to a close. Thank you for your time over two evidence sessions, James, and for your time on that one, Adrian. Thank you.
Well, look out for the transformation guidance.
Okay, so just while the officials are making their way out, just maybe through the clerk first of all, if there are any actions arising from that session. I'm not aware of anything, I think, specific in terms of follow-ups that were identified.
No, it sounded like June was an interesting time for a lot of the information to come together, so the officials might be back with us shortly after the summer, and maybe even the things that are sub judice now will be discussable at that time.
Okay, no, thank you. So I'm not seeing any other indications on any other further follow-up, so we will move on to the next item, which is correspondence. So I would refer members to pages 174 to 248 of your packs, and also there were some additional pieces of correspondence that were tabled. So at page 174, as usual, there's a summary note. I will just go through anything that where I think there's a need for a committee decision or discussion. Other than that, we will deal with it as per the summary note. So the first bit, just to direct members to, is at page 239, and that's item 9.6. And it's a response from the Department of Education providing an update on legislative plans for the GTCNI, the General Teaching Council for Northern Ireland. I don't think there's any actions arising that are immediately apparent, other than perhaps it had been suggested through the clerk that it might be a good opportunity to seek an update from the department on the department's review of all arm's length bodies, just to see where that is at. So I would be happy to propose that as an action, and also it did perhaps strike me that it may be worth hearing in writing just what the views of the NITC are on this, as obviously this is a very direct impact on teachers who are paying subscriptions into this body in terms of those proposals. So those would be my two suggestions, but if the members have any other views or any comments they want to make around this, I think it's good to see this coming forward, as it's long overdue. It's sort of been in a bit of a holding pattern with the GTCNI for a while, but if there are any other views other than that, and we're agreed on those actions.
Agreed.
Okay, so then I would direct members to item 9.9. I think maybe some piece of correspondence got reversed in the list, so I don't, in case there's any confusion, but my understanding it is item 9.9, page 241, which is correspondence from the Committee for Infrastructure, providing a response from TransLink that they received in relation to the safety of children travelling on school buses or school bus routes. Just open it up. I'm content to note at this stage, but I just wanted to open it up to members if there were any views or any actions anyone wanted to suggest. Otherwise, content to note. Okay. Then just into tabled papers, we have a document from Michael Cross from the EA's Outdoor Centre at McGilligan, following up on the committee's outdoor education in schools event. I think we are still sort of keeping a motion on that issue under consideration. So I would suggest we note at this stage and factor into that, and perhaps if the clerk was able to update on where we're at in terms of the development.
Yeah, so I was speaking to Michael yesterday or the day before, and to Forest School and some of the academics from Queen's who were there on Friday. So just in terms of what the key parts of the motion, key parts of the strategy would require to be covered in a motion for it to be acceptable or contain all of the essentials that the broader outdoor education sector would be interested in. So I think Michael would probably be open to giving you a briefing on his document. We could have that in informal meeting if we don't manage to get a school uniform briefing in there on Tuesday. But yeah, so essentially it's just trying to make the motion robust so that it will be what people want.
I mean, I'm certainly open to seeking an informal briefing as long as it does fit in with the forward work plan in terms of, we want to obviously prioritise the bill's scrutiny. So
absolutely.
Members are agreed. Item 9.11, it's correspondence from the Unite the Union, and it is just some follow-up in relation to the ongoing issue that the committee's been looking at around Access NI checks and how that has played out within the system. But the focus that the Unite the Union are taking on this is actually that they feel it has highlighted some of the issues around the insecure, precarious working arrangements for a lot of classroom assistants on temporary contracts. There was obviously an issue arose last week at committee where we were aware some classroom assistants have ended up with they're no longer in employment on the back of the Access NI issues. His issue is around fixed term worker regulations and a number of classroom assistants that they're aware of who remain in the system after a number of years service who haven't been made permanent. I do think this would be something that would be worth hearing more from Unite, possibly with some follow up with the EA. But I would want to suggest, perhaps just given the pressures on our forward work plan, that we do go back to Unite and invite a detailed written briefing on that issue, just maybe to see some of the numbers around the issue that they're referring to, maybe some of the different contracts that are in place. I know it is a bit of a patchwork picture, and that could then be potentially for a more detailed briefing at another time. Would members be agreed with that approach? In agreement? Okay, and then there are two bits in table papers I think which have come in relation to the school uniforms bill, so I would just suggest that they're noted and tabled as part of the bill consideration. Other than that, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 174? Great. Okay, that takes us to item 10, which is the forward work programme. Forward work programme's in your packs at page 254. So I'll just hand over to the clerk and ask her to speak to that in the first instance.
Okay, so everyone, we're just trying to populate with the uniforms bill witnesses as much as possible, and so we have confirmed a couple of things, but not entirely next week. So we've got NAHT coming on the 28th. NGIC2 speaking about uniform on the 28th. Human Rights Commission coming on the 20th, which is the 27th, sorry, which is the Tuesday morning slot. 3rd of June, several young people's, so Nikki, the Nikki Youth Panel, some other young youth groups and youth panels in that 4 to 7 slot in the afternoon on the Tuesday. And CMA on the 4th of June. So we're getting in the young people, the kind of commercial considerations. The parents aren't scheduled yet. The poverty and charitable bodies aren't scheduled yet. And research are still getting us some stakeholders to talk about the progress that's been made in other jurisdictions. So we're just working away on that in the background. And I'll keep you up to date as soon as we have things finalised.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, come on, Michelle. Yeah.
To keep us right with all of this, when there's extra things going in, can you send us a diary invite? Because even members of our team are putting diary invites for us, thinking it's clear in our own diaries. If there's things like this coming up where there's blanket amounts, we should be clear in our diary. We need that in because we'll get double booked very quickly.
Okay. So do you want us to have, even if we haven't finalised everybody who's going to be in the slot,
even it's probably just ways to do that. Yeah.
Yes, we'll do that.
Those in diaries.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Other than that, are members content to note the forward work plan as drafted? Okay.
Just,
Yes,
Chair,
Deputy Chair.
are we having, I suppose this is more for Aoibhinn, are we having trouble getting people to come in to give evidence?
I suppose it's just a bit faster in the scheduling than you would normally expect in a committee stage. So,
Right.
yeah, I think.
And just in terms of the stakeholders who are being invited and given the sort of a timeline we've set out, when would we expect to have heard from all the stakeholders who were inviting?
Well, we're hoping to hear from all of them kind of end the end of May and first couple of weeks of June, to be able to then make conclusions and do that work. I mean, we have programmed those extra committee times in order to do that.
And you're confident we're going to get through it?
I mean, it's not all within my control. I guess the initial timetables that the committee looked at was more based on the experience that the Assembly would have in these things. So yeah, it's not entirely within my control, but the committee can decide when it's satisfied that it understands the various facets of the bill, and if it can take a snapshot, make a report, and let the bill go on to the next stage of the process.
No, I'm just thinking, I mean, in terms of next week, we don't have anyone confirmed yet, do we?
Down.
Or is it, who's that ECNI?
Equality Commission.
Oh, so they are confirmed? They're not confirmed?
What did they say in the end, Mark? Okay, so no, I have contacted them, but I haven't heard back, and Mark hasn't heard back. We were going to have a Children's Law Centre on both restraint and seclusion and school uniforms, and they've just let us know today that they won't be able to address school uniforms. So
just to come in, I think from my perspective, I think in some of these instances where we're asking witnesses to turn it around in 1 or 2 weeks to come in with a briefing and be ready to go on a piece of legislation that they obviously want to be properly briefed for. It's not the normal time scale, to say, can you be here next week? And that is not normal. So we do have a bit of a challenge there. And when we're trying to bring stakeholders together, you have multiple diaries to manage. So, and again, not just to some of these are young people as well who are not necessarily going to be available in committee sitting times. So it does produce just a little bit of an additional challenge, I think, in the constrained time scale. But I'm confident that the clerk and our team are doing all they can to get the stakeholders in that we need. But we are, to a degree, at mercy of other people's calendars, which does make it slightly more challenging. Peter?
Thanks, Chair. I'm fully cognizant of that, and I know that the team are doing all they can to get everyone in. I mean, it's just worth saying, following on from what Pat said, that and to make it clear to people who are maybe watching today or thinking of putting in evidence that we can accept written evidence. We don't need everyone in front of this committee, and whilst it's useful and it's very important to hear from some key stakeholders, that we will consider any written evidence that's submitted. So in terms of the scaling and hearing all that we need to hear, there is that option. It's worth just making that point that people can submit written evidence, and that will be taken.
Absolutely. I mean, I would want to just, completely, anyone who wants to make a written submission, please do so. But I think the concern would be in terms of the quality of scrutiny. It's even being satisfied that every member will read every written submission that comes in. You're taking that on trust. I think we want to be assured that the committee has heard and had the opportunity to interrogate that evidence. And I think, it was clear from Retail NI that the evidence we received last week, went a lot further than what was in their written briefing in terms of the issues that were covered. So my preference is, if we can have oral evidence sessions for the key stakeholders, that we should absolutely be trying to secure that.
Sure. I agree with that completely, but I also agree with Peter. I mean, we've a fairly short timeline here, and we're moving into the holiday period, which is going to make it even more difficult for stakeholders and organisations to come in and give evidence if we have to sit over the summer. So, I mean, I'm of the view that that option should be given to stakeholders. If you're not in a position to come before the cut-off date, then if you want to submit written evidence, by all means do so. And I suppose we'll have to take it on trust that everyone will read those submissions.
Yeah, I mean, there will be some corralling of the submissions by theme and, by the clauses that they refer to. That will be done by my team before you guys consider them together. So we can do that with written but as well as the chair says, there's kind of a more immediate and more candid aspect to oral evidence that can light up a topic in a different way.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, my first preference is to have witnesses here and to hear their evidence.
Yeah.
But it is going to be quite difficult for some of them,
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Well, the other thing I would just had mentioned to the clerk very briefly today, earlier after the concurrent session, I think it would be useful, possibly at matters arising. You'll all have had your bill folder shared with you. I think if there's any key information that is being added to that folder, I think for that to be brought to members' attention on a weekly basis, so that we're making sure that nothing's landing in there in written form that members are missing. So I think that if that's something that can be done just as a standing item over the next number of weeks, I think that would be helpful, because I think there's some pieces have landed in there already which may be of interest to members, so just to note that.
Yeah, so for your information, there's some submissions that have come in recently, and also the guidance that members were asking about on the different levels of assembly control, so for secondary legislation to come back, what negative means, what confirmatory and all of that. And also I met the bill team this week, and they mentioned that we were talking about the time frames for all of this, for the guidance being developed and the guidelines coming in, and when they go to schools and when they go into prospectuses, and they're going to set that out in writing. But they also provided a letter that the former Permanent Secretary sent out last year to kind of give schools an indication of these time frames, so it can let you see the elements that the department is relying on, kind of to in terms of its communication plan. So that's in your packs now as well.
If I could just to close that off, I think that information you referred to around the different levels of assembly scrutiny that can be applied to regulations coming through, I would suggest if that could be tabled for next week, I think that would be helpful for members. There may be a desire to discuss that, so if it tabled just into the pack as well, would I think be helpful, just to make sure it gets discussion, as it was a clear follow-up from the examiner's evidence last week. Okay, so members, that moves us to item 11, and that's any other business. Is there any? Michelle?
One really quick one on the back of both committees that we had today, and it's occurred to me previously. It's not one for big discussion, maybe it's one for the clerks to take away. I sometimes get concerned with the formatting of the briefings that we get, that we're not getting the information that we really need. There's a lot of words but not a lot of information. It's hard to track progress. Like today, it was very evident that there had been very little progress made in the last year. And I think if we perhaps thought about the format that we get those briefings in, is something like a more of a pro forma, I think, to what I would have got in council. There would have always been a background section. There would have been something on the finance. If it was a policy decision, it would have linked to the equality implications. There was just certain information I feel like if we had that consistently, it would allow us to scrutinise and get the information that we're expecting, like statistics, things like the obvious things you think you're going to get and you don't. It might be something to give some thought to, and then it'll be easier then to kind of refer back to what you got previously to see where there has been development and improvement. I just find it frustrating we get them in all different formats. We don't get actually the quality that we need sometimes, and I think this morning in particular really illustrated that. So I don't know if anybody else thinks that's worth it.
Potentially we could maybe put a template together for our key stakeholders to use, so that they tick those
even
boxes
the finance
and
budget,
those.
that kind of stuff you think is obvious that you would want to obviously see, but you don't always get it. And it feels like a bit more consistency might aid our scrutiny and aid the transparency that we're getting from the department.
Potentially something could be fed up the chain to be on a CLG agenda as well, in terms of that. It could be something we could look at.
Certainly. No, we like templates.
Okay.
I'm sure you will get an hour to get your template.
Thank you, Michelle. So that then brings us to item 12, which is date, time and place of next meeting, and that will be next week, Wednesday the 21st of May, 2 p.m, room 29, and it just leaves me to put the question at the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Excuse me, Chair, is there a possibility that we might have a committee meeting on Tuesday morning? There is a possibility of that?
Yeah.
I mean a proper committee meeting as opposed to an informal meeting?
So requiring a quorum.
Yeah.
Okay. This week specifically,
Well,
we
yeah,
got
because
some
we're trying to use all of the opportunities that we have.
I suppose it's just maybe just to speak to that. It's the sooner we can get that information to members, the better.
So we'll tell you as soon as possible. Sorry, but I just don't want to let it go.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound.